brilliant is the unabridged recording of Shipbreaker by Paolo Bacigalupi, performed by Joshua Swanson, produced by Audible Incorporated.
Chapter 1. Naylor clambered through a service duct, tugging at copper wire and yanking it free. Ancient asbestos fibers and mouse grit puffed up around him as the wire tore loose. He scrambled deeper into the duct, jerking more wire from its aluminum staples. The staples pinged about the cramped metal passage like coins offered to the scavenge god, and Naylor felt after them eagerly, hunting for their dull gleam and collecting them in a leather bag he kept at his waist. He yanked again at the wiring. A meter's worth of precious copper tore loose in his hands, and dust clouds enveloped him. The LED glow paint smeared on Naylor's forehead gave him a dim green phosphorescent view of the service ducts that made up his world. Grime and salt sweat stung his eyes and trickled around the edges of his filter mask. With one scarred hand, he swiped at the salty rivulets, careful to avoid rubbing off the LED paint. The paint itched and drove him crazy, but he didn't relish finding his way back out of the maze-like ducts in blind blackness. So he let his forehead itch and again surveyed his position. Rusty pipes ran ahead of him, disappearing into darkness. Some iron, some steel. Heavy crew would be the ones to deal with that. Naylor only cared about the light stuff, the copper wiring, the aluminum, the nickel, the steel clips that could be sacked and dragged out through the ducts to his light crew waiting outside. Naylor turned to continue down the service passage, but as he did, he banged his head on the duct ceiling. The noise from his collision echoed loud, as if he were sitting inside a Christian church bell. Dust cascaded into his hair. Despite the filter mask, he started coughing as powder leaked in around the poorly sealed edges. He sneezed, then sneezed again, eyes watering. He pulled the mask away and wiped his face, then pressed it back over his mouth and nose, willing the stickum to seal, but not holding out much hope. The mask was a hand-me-down, given to him by his father. It itched and never sealed quite right because it was the wrong size, but it was all Naylor had. On its side, faded words said, "Discard after 40 hours use." But Naylor didn't have another, and no one else did either. He was lucky to have a mask at all, even if the microfibers were beginning to shred from repeated scrubbings in the ocean. Sloth, his crew girl, made fun of him whenever he washed the mask, asking why he even bothered. It just made the hellish ductwork hotter and more uncomfortable. There was no point, she said. Sometimes he thought she was right. But Pima's mother told him and Pima to use the masks no matter what, and for sure there was a lot of black grime in the filters when he immersed them in the ocean. That was the black that wasn't in his lungs, Pima's mother said, so he kept on with the mask, even though he felt like he was smothering every time he sucked humid tropic air through the clogged, breath-wet fibers. A voice echoed down into the duct. "You got the wire?" Sloth, calling in from where she waited outside. "Almost done." Naylor scrambled a little farther into the duct, ripping more staples, hurriedly yanking extra copper loose. The duct's passage went on, but he had enough. He slashed the wire free with the serrated back of his work knife. "We're good," he shouted. Sloth's acknowledging shout echoed back. "Clear!" The wire whipped away from him, slithering through the crawl spaces, raising dust clouds as it moved. Far down the maze of ducts, Sloth was cranking away at a winding drum. Sweat bright on her skin, blonde hair pasted slick to her face as she sucked the wire out like a rice noodle from a bowl of Chen's soup ration. Naylor took his knife and hacked Bappy's light crew code above the place where he had clipped the wire. The symbol matched the swirling tattoos on Naylor's cheeks, the labor marks that gave him a right to work the wrecks under Bappy's supervision. Naylor took out a bit of powdered paint and spit on it, mixing it in his palm before smearing it over the mark. Now, even from a distance, his scratches gave off an iridescent glow. He used his finger and the remaining paint to write a string of memorized numerals below the symbol, LC57-1844, Bappy's permit code. No one else was competing for this stretch right now, but it was good to mark the territory. Naylor gathered the rest of the aluminum staples and scuttled back through the ducting on hands and knees, skirting weak points where the metal wasn't well supported, listening to his own echoes and thumps and ringing taps against the steel as he hustled out, all his senses testing for signs that the ducts might break. His little phosphor LED showed the dust snake slither where the copper cables had gone before him. He crawled over desiccated rat bodies and their nests. Even here, in the belly of an old oil tanker, there were rats. But these ones had died a long time ago. He crawled over more bones, small ones that came from cats and bits of birds. Feathers and fluff floated in the air. This close to the outside world, the access ducts were a graveyard for all sorts of lost creatures. Ahead, sunlight showed, a glaring brightness. Naylor squinted as he clawed toward the light, thinking that this was what rebirth must be like for the life cult. This climbing toward blazing clean sunshine. And then he spilled out of the duct and onto hot steel decking. He tore off his mask, gasping. Bright tropic sunlight and ocean salt breezes bathed him. All around, sledgehammers rang against iron as swarms of men and women clamored over the ancient oil tanker, tearing it apart. Heavy crews peeled away iron panels with acetylene torches and sent them wafting off the sides like palm leaves, crashing to the beach sands below, where more crews dragged the scavenge above high tide. Light crews like Naylor's tore at the ship's small fittings, stripping copper, brass, nickel, aluminum, and stainless steel. Others hunted for hidden petrol and ship oil pockets, bucketing out the valuable fluid. An ant's nest of activity, all dedicated to rendering this extinct ship's bones into something usable for a new world. "Took you long enough," Sloth said. She hammered at their spool's securing clips, releasing it from the winding spindle. Her pale skin gleamed in the sunlight, her own swirling work tattoos almost black against the flush of her cheeks. Sweat ran down her neck. Her blonde hair was chopped short, much like his own, to keep it from catching in the thousands of crevices and whirling bits of machinery that studded their workplace. "We're in deep," Naylor said. "Plenty of servicing wire, but it takes a long time to get to it." "You always got an excuse." "Quit complaining. We'll make quota." "We better," Sloth said. "Bappy's saying there's another light crew buying scavenge rights." Naylor made a face. "Big surprise." "Yeah, this was too good to last for long. Give me a hand." Naylor got on the other side of the spool. They lifted it from its spindle, grunting. Together they tipped the spool sideways and let it fall to the rusted deck with a clang. Shoulder to shoulder, they leaned into the weight, legs flexing, teeth gritted. The spool slowly began to roll. Naylor's bare feet burned against the sun-blasted deck. The cant of the ship made for hard pushing, but under their combined effort, the spool slowly rumbled forward, crunching over blistered preservative paint and loosened metal deck plates. From the height of the tanker's deck, Bright Sands Beach stretched into the distance, a tarred expanse of sand and puddled seawater, littered with the savaged bodies of other oil tankers and freighters. Some were completely whole, as if crazy sea captains had simply decided to steer the kilometer-long ships onto the sand and then walked away. Others were flayed and stripped, showing rusty iron girder bones. Hulls lay like chunks of cleavered fish. A conning tower here, a crew quarters there, the prow of an oil tanker pointing straight up to the sky. It was as if the scavenge god had come amongst the ships, slashing and chopping, dicing the huge iron vessels into pieces, and then left the corpses scattered carelessly behind. And wherever the huge ships lay, scavenge gangs like nailers swarmed like flies, chewing away at iron meat and bones, dragging the old world's flesh up the beach to the scrap weighing scales and the recycling smelters that burned 24/7 for the profit of Lawson and Carlson, the company that made all the cash from the blood and sweat of the shipbreakers. Naylor and Sloth paused for a moment, breathing hard, leaning against the heavy spool. Naylor wiped the sweat out of his eyes. Far out on the horizon, the oily black of the ocean turned blue, reflecting sky and sun. Whitecaps foamed. The air around Naylor was hazed with the black work of shoreline smelters, but out there, beyond the smoke, he could see sails. The new clipper ships, replacements for the massive coal and oil-burning wrecks that he and his crew worked to destroy all day long. Gull white sails, carbon fiber hulls, and faster than anything except a maglev train. Naylor's eyes followed a clipper ship as it sliced across the waters, sleek and fast and completely out of reach. It was possible that some of the copper on his spool would eventually sail away on a ship like that, first hauled by train to the Orleans, then transferred to a clipper's cargo hold, where it would be carried across the ocean to whatever people or country could afford the scavenge. Bappy had a poster of a clipper ship from libe-skinned Brown and Mahanraj. It connected to his reusable wall calendar and showed a clipper with high-altitude parasails extended far above it, sails that Bappy said could reach the jet streams and yank a clipper across smooth ocean at more than 55 knots, flying above the waves on hydrofoils, tearing through foam and salt water, slicing across the ocean to Africa and India, to the Europeans and the Nipponese. Naylor stared at the distant sails hungrily, wondering at the places they went, and whether any of them were better than his own. "Naylor! Sloth! Where the hell have you been?" Naylor jerked from his reverie. Pima was waving up at them from the tanker's lower deck, looking annoyed. "We're waiting for you, crew boy." "Boss girl on the prowl," Sloth muttered. Naylor grimaced. Pima was the oldest of them, and it made her bossy. Even his own long friendship with her didn't shelter him when they were behind quota. He and Sloth turned their attention back to the spool. With another series of grunts, they heaved it over the ship's warped decking and rolled it to where a rudimentary crane had been set up. They hitched the spool to rusted iron hooks, then grabbed the crane cable and jumped aboard the spool as it descended, swaying and spinning to the lower deck. Pima and the rest of the light crew swarmed around them as they hit bottom. They unclipped the spool and rolled it over to where they'd set up their stripping operation near the oil tanker's prow. Lengths of discarded insulation from the electrical wire lay everywhere, along with the gleaming rolls of copper that they'd collected, stacked in careful lines and marked with Bappy's light crew claim mark, the same swirled symbol that scarred all their cheeks. Everyone started unreeling sections of Naylor's new haul, parting the lengths out amongst themselves. They worked quickly, accustomed to one another and the labor. Pima, their boss girl, taller than the rest and filling out like a woman, black as oil and hard as iron. Sloth, skinny and pale, bones and knots of knees and dirty blonde hair, the next candidate for duck and scuttle work when Naylor got too big. Her pale skin almost permanently sunburned and peeling. Moon Girl, the shade of brown rice, whose nail-shed mother had died with the last run of malaria, and who worked light crew harder than anyone else because she'd seen the alternative. her ears and lips and nose decorated with scavenged steel wire that she'd driven through her flesh in the hope that no one would ever want her the way they'd wanted her mother. Tick-tock, nearsighted and always squinting at everything around him, almost as black as Pima, but nowhere near as smart. Fast with his hands as long as you told him what to do with them, and he never got bored. Pearly, the Hindu who told them stories about Shiva and Kali and Krishna, and who was lucky enough to have both a mother and a father who worked oil scavenge. Black hair and dark tropic skin, and a hand missing 3 fingers from an accident with the winding drum. And then there was Naylor. Some people, like Pearly, knew who they were and where they came from. Pima knew her mother came up from the last of the islands across the Gulf. Pearly told everyone who would listen that he was 100% Indian. Hindu Marwari through and through. Even Sloth said that her people were Irish. Naylor was nothing like that. He had no idea what he was. Half of something and a quarter of something else. Brown skin and black hair like his dead mother, but with weird, pale blue eyes like his father. Pearly had taken one look at Naylor's pale eyes and claimed he was spawned by demons, but Pearly made things up all the time. He said Pima was Kali reincarnated, which was why her skin was so black, and why she was so damn mean when they were behind quota. Even so, the truth was that Naylor shared his father's eyes and his father's wiry build, and Richard Lopez was a demon for sure. No one could argue that. Sober, the man was scary. Drunk, he was a demon. Naylor unwound a section of wire and squatted down on the blazing deck. He crimped the wire with his pliers and ripped off a sleeve of insulation, revealing the shining copper core. Did it again, and again. Pima squatted beside him with her own length of wire. "Took you long enough to bring out this load?" Naylor shrugged. "Nothing's close in anymore. I had to go a long way to find it." "That's what you always say." "You want to go into the hole? You can." "I'll go in," Sloth volunteered. Naylor gave her a dirty look. Pearly snorted. "You don't have the sense of a half-man. You'd get lost like Jackson Boy, and then we'd get no scavenge at all." Sloth made a sharp gesture. "Grind it, Pearly. I never get lost." "Even in the dark, when all the ducks look the same?" Pearly spat toward the edge of the ship, missed, and hit the rail instead. "Crews on Deep Blue 3 heard Jackson Boy calling out for days. Couldn't find him, though. Little ice spider finally just dried up and died." "Bad way to go," Tick-Tock commented. "Thirsty, in the dark, alone." "Shut up, you two," Moon Girl said. "Do you want the dead to hear you calling?" Pearly shrugged. "We're just saying Naylor always makes quota." "Shit." Sloth ran a hand through sweaty blonde hair. "I'd get 20 times the scavenge Naylor gets." Naylor laughed. "Go on in then. We'll see if you come out alive." "You already filled the spool." "Tough grind for you then." Pima tapped Naylor's shoulder. "I'm serious about the scavenge. We had downtime waiting for you." Naylor met Pima's eyes. "I make quota. You don't like my work? Then go in yourself." Pima pursed her lips, annoyed. It was an empty suggestion, and they both knew it. She'd gotten too big, and had the scabs and scars on her spine and elbows and knees to prove it. Light crew needed small bodies. Most kids got bounced off the crew by the time they hit their mid-teens, even if they starved themselves to keep their size down. If Pima weren't such a good crew boss, she'd already be on the beach, hungry and begging for anything that came her way. Instead, she had another year, maybe, to bulk up enough to compete against hundreds of others for openings in heavy crew. But her time was running out, and everyone knew it. Pima said, "You wouldn't be so cocky if your dad wasn't such a whipwire." You'll be in the same position as me. Well, that's one thing I can thank him for then. If his father was any indication, Naylor would never be huge. Fast, maybe, but never big. TikTok's dad claimed that none of them would grow that big anyway, because of the calories they didn't eat. Said that people up in Seascape, Boston were still tall, though. Had plenty of money and plenty of food. Never went hungry. Got fat and tall. Naylor had felt his belly up against his spine enough times that he wondered what it would be like to have so much food. Wondered how it would feel to never wake in the middle of the night with his teeth chewing on his lips, fooling himself into thinking that he was about to eat meat. But it was a stupid fantasy. Seascape Boston sounded a little too much like Christian heaven, or the way the scavenge god promised a life of ease if you could just find the right offering to burn with your body when you went to his scales. Either way, you had to die to get there. The work went on. Naylor stripped more wire, tossing the junk insulation over the ship's side. The sun beat down on everyone. Their skins gleamed. Salt sweat jewels soaked their hair and dripped into their eyes. Their hands turned slick with work, and their crew tattoos shone like intricate knots on their flushed faces. For a little while they talked and joked, but gradually fell silent, working the rhythm of scavenge, building piles of copper for whoever was rich enough to afford it. "Boss man coming!" The warning call came up from the waters below. Everyone hunkered down, looking busy, waiting to see who would appear at the rail. If it was someone else's boss, they could relax. Bappy. Naylor grimaced as their crew boss clambered up over the rail, puffing. His black hair gleamed and his potbelly made it hard for him to climb. But there was money involved, so the bastard managed. Bappy leaned against the rail, regaining his breath. Sweat darkened the tank top that he wore for work. Yellow and brown stains of whatever curry or sandwich he'd eaten for lunch dotted the material. It made Naylor hungry just looking at all the food on Bappy's chest. But there was no meal coming until evening, and there was no point looking at food Bappy would never share. Bappy's quick brown eyes studied them, alert for signs that they'd gone lazy and weren't serious about scavenging for quota. Even though none of them had been idle before, with Bappy watching they all worked faster, trying to demonstrate they were worth keeping. Bappy had been light crew himself once. He knew their ways, knew the tricks of laziness. It made him dangerous. "What you got?" he asked Pima. Pima glanced up, squinting into the sun. "Copper! Lots. Naylor found new ducks that gorgeous his crew missed." Bappy's teeth flashed white, showing the front gap where a fight had cost him his incisors. "How much?" Pima jerked her head at Naylor, giving him permission. "Maybe 120 kilos so far," Naylor estimated. "There's more down there." "Yeah?" Bappy nodded. "Well, hurry and get it out. Don't worry about stripping it. Just make sure you get it all." He looked out toward the horizon. "Larson and Carlson says a storm's coming. Big one. We're going to be off the wrecks for a couple days. I want enough wire that you can work it on the sand." Naylor stifled his distaste at the thought of going back down into the blackness, but Bappy must have caught something of his expression. "Got a problem, Naylor? You think a storm means you get to sit on your ass?" Bappy waved toward the work camps strung along the beach's jungle edge. "You think I can't get 100 other lice biters to take your place? There's kids down there who'd let me cut out an eye if it would get them up on a wreck." Pima interceded. "He's got no problem. You want the wire? We'll get it. No problem." She glared at Naylor. "We're your crew, boss. No problem at all." They all nodded emphatically. Naylor got to his feet and handed the rest of the wire over to Tick-Tock. "No problem, boss," he repeated. Bappy scowled at Naylor. "You sure you vouch for him, Pima? I can put a knife through this one's crude tats and dump him on the sand." "He's good scavenge," she said. "We're ahead on quota 'cause of him." "Yeah?" Bappy relented slightly. "Well, you're boss girl. I don't interfere." He eyed Naylor. "You watch it, boy. I know how your kind thinks. Always imagining you're going to be a lucky strike. Pretending you'll find some big old oil pocket and never work another day in your life. Your old man was a lazy bastard like that. Look how he turned out." Naylor felt a rising anger. "I don't talk about your dad." Bappy laughed. "What? You gonna fight me, boy? Try and pig stick me from behind the way your old man would?" Bappy touched his knife. "Pima vouches for you, but I'm wondering if you got the sense to know how much of a favor she's doing." "Let it go, Naylor," Pima urged. "Your dad's not worth it." Bappy watched, smiling slightly. His hand lingered close to his knife. Bappy had all the cards, and they both knew it. Naylor ducked his head and forced down his anger. "I'll get your scavenge, boss. No problem." Bappy gave Naylor a sharp nod. "Smarter than your old man, then." He turned to the rest of the crew. "Listen up, everyone. We don't have a lot of time. If you get the extra scavenge out before the storm, I'll bonus you. There's another light crew coming on soon. We don't want to leave them any easy pickings, right?" He grinned feral, and they all nodded back. "No easy pickings," they echoed. Chapter 2. Naylor was farther into the tanker than he'd ever been. No light crew marks gleamed in the darkness. No evidence of any other duct and scuttle workers marred the dust and rat droppings of the passage. Overhead, 3 separate lines of copper wire ran ahead of him, a lucky find that meant he might even make Bappy's quota. But Naylor was having a hard time caring. His mask kept clogging, and in the rush to dive back into the hole, he'd forgotten to renew his LED paint patch. Now he regretted it bitterly, as darkness closed in. He ripped down more tangled wire. The passage seemed to be getting narrower, even as the amount of copper increased. He eased forward, and the duct creaked all around, protesting his weight. Petroleum fumes burned in his lungs. He wished he could just quit and crawl out. If he turned around now, he could be back on deck in 20 minutes, breathing clean air. But what if he didn't have enough scavenge? Bappy already didn't like him, and Sloth was too damn eager to steal his slot. Her words still lingered in his mind. "I'll get 20 times the scavenge he does." A warning. He had competition now. It didn't matter that Pima vouched for him. If Naylor failed to pull quota, Bappy would slash out his work tattoos and give Sloth a try. And Pima couldn't do a damn thing about it. No one was worth keeping if they didn't make a profit. Naylor wriggled onward, driven by Sloth's hungry words. More and more copper came down in his hands. His LED faded to black. He was alone. Nothing but a trail of loose-ended electrical cable to lead him out. For the first time, he feared he might not be able to find his way. The tanker was huge, one of the workhorses of the oil age, almost a floating city in itself. And now he was deep in its guts. When Jackson Boy died, no one had been able to find him. They'd heard him banging away on the metal, calling out, but no one could locate a way into the double hall where he'd trapped himself. A year later, Heavy crews cut open a section of iron, and the little lice biter's mummified body had popped out like a pill from a blister pack. Dry like leaves, rattling as it hit the deck, rat-chewed and desiccated. Don't think about it. You'll just bring his ghost onto the ship. The duct was tightening, squeezing around his shoulders. Naylor began to imagine himself stuck like a cork in a bottle, pinned in the darkness, never able to get free. He strained forward and yanked down another length of wire. Enough. More than enough. Naylor hacked Bappy's light crew code into the duct's metal with his knife, doing it blind, but at least making a stab at saving the territory for later. He tightened himself into a ball, knees against chin, elbows and spine scraping the duct walls as he turned himself around. Folding tighter, letting out his breath, fighting off images of corks and bottles and Jackson Boy caught in the darkness dying alone. Tighter, turning, listening to the duct creak as he squeezed against metal. He came free, gasping relief. In another year, he'd be too big for this work, and Sloth would take his niche for sure. He might be small for his age, but eventually everyone got too big for light crew. Naylor squirmed back down the duct, rolling the wire ahead of him. The loudest sound was his own rasping breath in the filter mask. He paused and reached ahead for the loosened wire, confirming that it was still there, still leading him out to the light. Don't panic. You took this wire down yourself. You just need to keep following it. A scuttling noise echoed behind him. Naylor froze, skin crawling. A rat, probably. But it sounded big. Unbidden, another image intruded. Jackson Boy. Naylor could imagine the dead crew boy's ghost in the ducts with him, creeping through the darkness, stalking him, reaching for his ankles with dry bone fingers. Naylor fought down panic. It was just superstition. Paranoia was for Moon Girl, not for him. But the fear was inside him now. He started shoving his scavenged wire aside, suddenly desperate for clean air and light. He'd crawl out, renew his LED paint, and then come back when he could see what was what. Screw Sloth and Bappy. He needed air. Naylor started squeezing around his tangled bundle of copper. The duct creaked dangerously as he squirmed past, protesting the collected weight of himself and the wire. Stupid to gather so much. Should have cut it in sections and let Pima and Sloth spool it out. But he'd been hurrying, and now, of all things, he'd collected too much. Naylor clawed forward, jamming the wire aside. Felt a flush of triumph as he kicked the last tangling wires off his legs. The duct groaned loudly and shuddered under him. Naylor froze. All around the duct pinged and creaked. It sank slightly, tilting. The whole thing was on the verge of collapse. Naylor's frantic activity and extra weight had weakened it. Naylor spread out his weight and lay still, heart pounding, trying to sense the duct's intentions. The metal went quiet. Naylor waited, listening. Finally he eased forward, delicately shifting his weight. Metal shrieked. The duct dropped out from under him. Naylor scrambled for handholds as his world gave way. His fingers seized scavenged wire. For a second it held, suspending him above an infinite pit. Then the wire tore loose. He plummeted. I don't want to be a Jackson Boy. I don't want to be a Jackson Boy. I don't... He hit liquid, warm and vicious. Blackness swallowed him with barely a ripple. Chapter 3. Swim, you bastard. Swim, you bastard. Swim, you bastard. Swim! Naylor sank like a stone through warm, reeking liquid. It was like trying to swim through thick air instead of water. No matter how hard he fought, the warmth gave way under him, sucking him deeper. Why can't I swim? He was a good swimmer, had never worried about drowning in the ocean, even in heavy surf. But now he kept sinking, his hand tangled in something solid, the copper wire. He grabbed for it, hoping it was still connected to the ducts above. It slithered through his fingers, slick and slimy. Oil! Naylor fought off panic. It was impossible to swim in oil. It just swallowed you like quicksand. He clawed again for the copper and looped the wiring around his hand to counteract its slickness. His sinking stopped. He began hauling himself back up out of the muck. His lungs screamed for air. Hand over hand, he dragged himself higher. He fought the urge to breathe, to give up and fill his lungs with oil. It would be so easy. He came out of the oil like a whale surfacing, oil sheeting off his face. He opened his mouth to breathe. Nothing. Just a strange pressure on his face. The mask. Naylor tore it off, gasping. Sucked air. Petroleum vapors burned his lungs, but he could breathe. He used the mask's clean interior to scrape at his eyes, clearing oil away. He opened them to an intense stinging and burning. Tears filled his eyes. He blinked rapidly. Blackness all around. Pitch blackness. He was in some kind of oil reservoir, maybe a leaked pool or some secondary storage chamber. Or he had no idea where he was in the ship. If he was really unlucky, he was in one of the main oil reservoirs. He finished wiping his eyes and tossed away the now useless mask. The fumes were dizzying. He forced himself to breathe shallowly as he clung to the wire. His skin burned with its petroleum coating. Hammers rang faintly in the distance. Workers banging away at the ship, all unaware of his emergency. His hands started to slide off the wire. Naylor grabbed desperately for a better handhold, hooking his arm through the tangles. Overhead, the duct creaked alarmingly. A tingle of fear ran through him. A few strands of wire that stretched to that high overhead duct were all that kept him from drowning. But the safety was temporary. Soon the duct would give way, and he'd sink again, his lungs filling with oil, thrashing and gurgling. Calm down, you idiot. Naylor considered trying to swim again, but discarded the idea. It was just his mind playing tricks, fantasizing that the liquid all around was actually water. But oil was different. It didn't support a body, no matter how much you wished. It just swallowed you up. Naylor had seen a man on heavy crew drown that way. He'd thrashed briefly in the oil, shouting and panicked, then slipped under, long before anyone could throw him a rope. Don't panic. Think. Naylor reached out, fingers straining into the blackness, reaching for anything, a wall, some bit of floating junk, anything to tell him where he was. His hand found nothing but air and mucky oil. His movements made the duct creak overhead. The wire sank slightly as something gave way. Naylor held his breath, expecting to go under, but the wire stopped sinking. Pima! He shouted. His voice echoed back fast, bouncing all around. Naylor clutched the wire, surprised. Judging from the sound, he wasn't in as big a space as he'd thought. There were walls nearby. Pima! Again, the fast echo. This wasn't some giant oil tank. It was much, much smaller. Heartened by the impression of walls, Naylor reached out again. But this time, instead of using a hand, he stretched out into the darkness with his toes. After 2 tries, rough metal met his skin. A wall of some sort, and something else. Naylor sucked in a grateful breath. A thin pipe running along its breadth. It was only a centimeter in diameter, but still, it had to be better than a tangle of copper dangling from a failing duct. Without waiting to reconsider, Naylor lunged for the wall. As he moved, the duct overhead shrieked and gave way. Naylor sank, thrashing and scrabbling for the thin pipe. His slick hands touched the wall, slipped off, caught. He dragged himself up against the wall, clinging by his fingertips. They trembled with the strain. The oil didn't give him any float at all. Already he was tiring. He couldn't support himself for long. Quickly, Naylor slid along the wall, seeking better handholds. If he was lucky, maybe there was a ladder. He reached a bend in the pipe. It turned sharply downward and disappeared into the oil. Naylor stifled a sob of frustration. He was going to die. Don't panic. If he started crying, he was screwed. He needed to think, not bawl like a baby, but already his mind felt drunk and scattered. The fumes were overwhelming. Naylor could see how this would end. He'd hang on for a little longer, inhaling more and more of the poisonous air, clinging like a bug to the wall, but eventually he'd get too tired and high, and he'd slip off. How could he die in such a stupid way? This wasn't even a storage tank, just some room full of pooled waste oil. It was a joke, really. Lucky Strike had found an oil pocket on a ship and bought his way free. Naylor had found one, and it was going to kill him. I'm going to drown in goddamn money. Naylor almost laughed at the thought. No one knew exactly how much oil Lucky Strike had found and smuggled out. The man had done it slow, over time, sneaking it out bucket by bucket until he had enough to buy out his indenture and burn off his work tattoos. But he'd had enough left over to set himself up as a labor broker selling slots into the very heavy crews that he'd escaped. Just a little oil had done so much for Lucky Strike, and Naylor was up to his neck in the damn stuff. Naylor! The voice was faint, far away. Sloth! Naylor's voice cracked with relief. I'm here! Down here! I fell through! He kicked in his excitement, and the oil rippled around him. A bit of green light illuminated the gloom above. Sloth's scavenge features peered through the duct hole, an LED smear on her forehead. Damn! You screwed big time, Naylor? She asked. Yeah, big time screwed. He grinned weakly. Pima sent me in for you. Tell her I need rope. A long pause. Pappy won't do it. Why? Another long silence. He wants copper. Sent me in for copper. Before the storm comes. Just drop me a rope. Gotta make quota. Her glow face disappeared. Pima sent stuff, case I found you. Case you needed help. Naylor grimaced. You see a ladder anywhere? Another long pause as they both peered at the gloom with her phosphor green paint lighting. Nothing. No ladders, no doors, just a rusty room filled with black murk. What's wrong with you? Sloth asked. You broke something? Naylor shook his head before remembering she probably couldn't see him well. I'm swimming in oil. You tell Bappy I'm up to my neck in oil. Thousands of gallons. It's worth his while to get me out. There's a lot of oil for him here. Another pause. Yeah? A lot? Naylor realized with a chill that Sly Sloth was calculating the advantages. Don't think you can do a Lucky Strike, he called up. Lucky Strike did it, she responded. We're crew, Naylor said, trying to keep his voice from showing fear. You tell Pima there's oil. You tell her there's a secret stash. If you don't, I'll haunt you like Jackson Boy and come back and gut you while you're sleeping. Silence. Sloth. Thinking. Naylor felt a sudden wash of hatred for her. The skinny, starved girl perched up there had all the power in the world to help or kill. To tell Bappy, at least, there was something to be gained from Naylor's survival, and yet there she sat. He called up, "Sloth?" "Shut up," she said. "I'm thinking." "We're crew," he reminded her. "We swore blood oath." But he knew the calculations she was making, her clever mind working the angles, sensing the great pool of wealth, the secret stash that she might pillage later, if Fates and the Rust Saint worked in her favor. He wanted to scream at her, to grab her and drag her down, teach her what it felt like to die sucking oil. But he couldn't yell at her, couldn't piss her off. He needed her, needed to convince her to help him survive. "We'll keep it secret," he offered. "We can lucky strike together." Another pause. Then she said, "You said yourself you're swimming in it. Soon as anyone sees you, they know you found a pocket." He grimaced. Too damn smart. That was the problem with girls like Sloth. Too damn smart for his own good. "We're crew," he said again, but he suspected it was pointless. He knew her too well, knew all of them too well. They'd all starved. They'd all talked about what they'd do if they ever found a lucky strike. And here Sloth had been given one. Chances like this didn't just come along. Sloth had to make her gamble. It was her chance. "Please," he prayed. "Please let her be good like Pima. Like Pima and her mom. Let her not be like Dad. Fates, please don't let her be like Dad." Sloth interrupted his whispered prayers. "Pima says I'm supposed to hook you up good if I find you." "You found me." "Yeah, that's for sure." A rustling. "Here's food and water." A shadow fell through the green glow of her forehead phosphor. It hit with a splash. Naylor could just see pale objects floating on the surface, starting to sink. He stretched for them, trying to keep his hand on the wall, managed to snag a water bottle before it disappeared. Everything else was already gone. The blackness of the room closed in on him again as Sloth disappeared. "Thanks for nothing!" he shouted after her, but she was already gone. He had no idea if Sloth would actually report to Pima, or if she'd just hurry back, dragging Copper, determined to replace him and think of some way to claim the oil prize all to herself. For certain, she wouldn't tell Bappy. Bappy would just call it light crew scavenge and keep it for himself. That meant they had hours more copper work to prepare for the storm. And that meant he had hours to wait, even if Pima knew where he was and that he needed help. With one slippery hand and his teeth, Naylor managed to open the plastic bottle and drink while he clung to the wall. He swished the first mouthful and spat it out, trying to clear the oil and gunk from his mouth, and then drank, hard and fast, gulping. Grateful. Unaware until the water was pouring into him how thirsty he'd been. He swallowed the rest greedily, then set the bottle floating in the blackness. If he died, this would be the last thing of him on the surface. A few scrabbling sounds drifted down from above, scraping and tearing. "Sloth?" The sound stopped, then started again. "Come on, Sloth. Help me out." He didn't know why he bothered. She had made her decision. As far as she was concerned, he was already a corpse. He listened as she busied herself with stripping out the rest of the copper. His fingers weakened. The oil crept up around his chin. Fates, he was tired. He wondered if Jackson Boy had also been betrayed by his crew, If that was why the lice spider hadn't been found until a year later, maybe someone had let him die on purpose. You're not going to die. But he was lying to himself. He was going to drown without a ladder or a door. Naylor's heart suddenly beat faster. If this was some room accidentally filled with oil, then there had to be doors. But they'd all be down below the surface. He'd have to dive down and risk not making it back up. Dangerous. You'll drown anyway. Sloth's not going to save you. That was the real truth. He could hang on for a little longer, getting weaker and weaker, but eventually his fingers would fail and he'd slip off. You're dead already. It was a curiously liberating thought. He really had nothing to lose. Naylor slid slowly along the wall, questing down into the murk with his toes, feeling for some bump or ledge that would tell him a door lay below. The first time, he found nothing, but the second, he let himself sink lower, oil lapping up around his jaw. His toes brushed something. He tilted his nose to the sky, letting the oil lap higher, up around his cheeks, closing around his mouth and nose. A ledge. A rim of metal. Naylor ran his toe along its width. It could be the top of a doorway, he guessed. It wasn't much more than 3 feet wide. The ledge itself was a boon. He could almost rest, letting his toes cling to it, taking some of the pressure off his trembling fingers. The ledge felt like a palace. You can rest now, he thought. You can wait for Pima. Sloth will tell her you're down here. You can wait it out. He killed the hope. Maybe Pima would come save him. Probably, though, Sloth wouldn't say anything about him at all. He was on his own. Naylor balanced on the ledge, on the edge of decision. Live or die, he thought. Live or die. He dove. Chapter 4. In a way, the black muck of the oil was no worse than the blackness above. Naylor let his hands do the work of seeing. He quested down along the rim of the door, sinking deeper, reading its outline. His hands touched a wheel lock. Naylor's heart surged with relief. The wheel was the kind used to hold back seawater if a hull breached. A solid, airtight door. He tugged at the wheel, trying to remember which way to turn it. It didn't budge. He fought down panic. Yanked on the wheel again. Nothing. It wouldn't move. And he was running out of air. Naylor kicked for the surface, using the wheel to launch himself upward, praying that he'd make it. He surfaced, flailing. His fingers scrabbled for the thin pipe, miraculously caught hold before he sank again. He wiped frantically at his face, clearing his nose and keeping his eyes shut. He blew air through his lips, pushing oil away from his mouth. Sucked in a fume-laden breath. With his eyes still closed, he felt again for the doorframe with his toes. He thought he'd lost it for a second, but then he scraped rust, and a moment later he was perched again. He smiled tightly. A door with a wheel. A chance if he could make the damn thing turn. More scrabbling echoed from above. Sloth at work still. He called up to her. "Hey, Sloth! I got me a way out. I'm coming for you, crew girl." The movement stopped. "You hear me?" His voice echoed all around. "I'm getting out, and I'm coming for you." "Yeah?" Sloth responded. "You want me to go get Pima?" Mockery laced her voice. Naylor again wished he could reach up and yank her down into the oil. Instead, Naylor made his voice reasonable. "If you go get Pima now, I'll forget you were going to let me drown." A long pause. Finally, Sloth said, "It's too late, right?" She went on. "I know you, Naylor. You'll tell Pima no matter what. and then I'm off crew and someone else buys in." Another pause. Then she said, "It's all fates now. If you got a way out, I'll see you on the outside. You get your revenge then." Naylor scowled. It had been worth a try. He thought about the door waiting below him. It might be locked from the far side. Maybe that was why the wheel didn't turn. Maybe... If it's locked, you die. Same as everything. No use worrying about it. He took a deep breath and went down again. This time with more air, and knowing what he was trying to do, he found the wheel quickly and then took his time working it. He braced his feet on the hatch frame, felt around for the latch handle. First he needed to unseal with the wheel, then he needed to yank the handle. He tried to turn the wheel again. Nothing. He leaned against it, bracing himself sideways and using his legs, fighting to keep a grip. Nothing. He hooked his elbow through the wheel. He was running out of air, but he didn't want to give up. He pulled again, harder, the wheel digging into the crook of his arm. His lungs were bursting. The wheel turned. Naylor redoubled his efforts. Golden, blue, and red pulses filled his vision. The wheel turned again, loosening. He was frantic for air, but he stayed down, fighting the urge to kick for the surface, turning the wheel faster and faster until his lungs were heaving. He launched himself upward again, hope running wild as he surfaced. Eager now, he hyperventilated a final time, huffing high in the blackness. Dove. Spinning, spinning, spinning the wheel, his lungs bursting. All or nothing, reckless with the need to get out. Naylor yanked the latch handle. For a second he worried that the door swung inward and that he would never be able to drag the thing open against the pressure of oil holding it closed. The door blew open. Naylor was sucked through in a black torrent. He slammed into a wall, curled into a ball as he tumbled. Oil roared around him. His forehead smashed against metal, and he almost took a breath, but forced himself to curl tighter, letting himself be turned and swirled and bounced and slammed through ship corridors like a jellyfish thrown by breakers onto a reef. He blasted into open air. Naylor's stomach dropped out of him. Free fall. Involuntarily, his eyes opened, stinging oil and scalding sun. A mirror bright ocean, almost white with its intensity. Blue waves rushed up to meet him. He had only a second to twist. He smashed into water. Sea salt swallowed him. The surge and swell of an oily sea. The roll of breakers. Naylor surged upward, kicking for the surface. Broke out into sunlight and waves, gasping. He sucked air, flooding his lungs with shining clean oxygen, starved for all the life he'd been sure he'd lost. Above him, a tear in the tanker's hull still spewed oil, marking where the ship had vomited him into open air. Black streams of crude traced down the ship's hide, running in slick rivulets. 50 feet of fall into shallow water, and he was alive. Naylor started to laugh. "I'm alive," he shouted. And then he was screaming, feeling a flood of victory and released terror, drunk on sunshine and waves and the people staring at him from shore. He swam for the beach, still laughing and drunk on survival. Waves caught him and pushed him into the shore. He realized that he'd been doubly lucky. If the tide hadn't come in, he would have slammed against sand instead of plunging into water. Naylor crawled out of the breakers and stood. His legs were weak from so long swimming, but he was standing on dry land, and he was alive. He laughed madly at Bappy and Lee and Rain and the hundreds of other laborers and crew gangs, all of them staring at him dumbstruck. "I'm alive!" he shouted at them. "I'm alive!" They all said nothing, simply stared. Naylor was about to shout again, but something in their faces made him look down. Sea foam lapped around his ankles, rust and bits of wire, shells and insulation, and intermixed with the ocean froth, his blood, running down his legs in streams, bright and red and steady, staining the waters with the pounding of his heart. Chapter 5. "You're lucky," Pima's mother said. "You should be dead." Naylor was almost too tired to respond, but he mustered a grin for the occasion. "But I'm not. I'm alive." Pima's mother picked up a blade of rusted metal and held it in front of his face. "If this was even another inch into you, you would have washed into shore as body scavenge." Sadhna regarded him seriously. "You're lucky. The fates were holding you close today. Should have been another Jackson boy." She offered him the rusty shiv. "Keep that for talisman. It wanted you. It was going for your lung." Naylor reached for the metal that had almost cut him down and winced as his stitches pulled. "You see," she said, "you're blessed today. Fates love you." Naylor shook his head. "I don't believe in fates." But he said it quietly, low enough that she wouldn't hear. If fates existed, they'd put him with his dad, and that meant they were bad news. Better to think life was random than to think the world was out to get you. Fates were all right if you were Pima and got lucky with a good mom and a dad who was nice enough to have died before he could start beating you. But the rest of the time, watch out. Pima's mother looked up, her dark brown eyes studying him. "Then you get right with whatever gods you worship. I don't care if it's that elephant-headed Ganesha, or Jesus Christ, or the Rust Saint, or your dead mother. But someone was looking after you. Don't spit on that gift." Naylor nodded obediently. Pima's mother was the best thing he had going. He didn't want to tick her off. Her shack of plastic tarps and old boards and scavenged palms was the safest place he knew. Here he could always count on shared crawdads or rice, and even on days when there was nothing to eat, well, there was still the certainty that within these walls, under blue dangling fate's eyes and a mottled statue of the Rust Saint, no one would try to cut him, or fight him, or steal from him. Here, fear and tension fell away in the presence of Sadhna's strength. Naylor moved gingerly, testing the stitching and cleaning work she'd done. "It feels good, Sadhna. Thanks for patching me." "I hope it does you some good." She didn't look up. She was washing the stainless steel knives in a bucket of water, and the water had turned red with her work. "You're young. You're not addicted to anything. And say what you like about your father, you've got that Lopez tenacity. You have a chance." "You think I'll get an infection?" Pima's mother shrugged, her corded muscles rippling under her tank. Her black skin gleamed in the candlelight of her shack. She'd left her own crew and shift to make sure that he'd been cleaned up. Dropped a quota, thanks to Pima, who had had the sense to run for her when she heard that her missing crewboy was down in the shallows instead of up in the ship. "I'm not sure, Naylor," she said. "You took a lot of cuts. Skin's supposed to protect you, but water's dirty here, and you were in oil." She shook her head. "I'm not a doctor." He made a joke of it. "I don't need a doctor. I just need a needle and thread. Patch me up like a sail. I'm good as new." She didn't smile. "Keep those clean. If you get fever or skin starts to pus, you find me. We'll put maggots on it and see if that will help." Naylor made a face, but he nodded at her fierce glare and gingerly sat up. He put his feet down on the floor, watching as Sadhna bustled around the single room, carrying his blood water out into the dark, then coming back. He straightened and carefully made his way to the door. He pushed the plastic scavenge door aside so that he could see down the beach. Even at night, the wrecks glowed with work, people laboring by torchlight as they continued the steady job of disassembly. The ships showed as huge black shadows against the bright star points and the surge of the Milky Way above. The torchlights flickered, bobbing and moving. Sledge noise rang across the water, comforting sounds of work and activity. The air tanged with the coal reek of smelters and the salt fresh breeze coming off the water. It was beautiful. Before almost dying, he hadn't known it. But now that he was out, Bright Sands Beach was the best thing he'd ever seen. He couldn't stop looking at it all, couldn't stop smiling at the people walking along the sand, at the cook fires where people roasted tilapia they'd hooked in the shallows, at the jangle of music and the shout of drinking from the nail sheds. It was all beautiful. Almost as beautiful as the sight of Sloth getting kicked down the beach, her eyes wet with tears for herself while he was getting stitched up. Bappy had put his knife through her light crew tattoos himself, disowning her completely. She'd never work as a shipbreaker again. And probably nowhere else either. Not after breaking blood oaths. She'd proven that no one could trust her. Naylor had been surprised that Sloth hadn't protested. He wasn't about to forgive, but he respected that she hadn't begged or tried to apologize when Bappy got out his knife. Everyone knew the score. What was done was done. She'd gambled and lost. Life was like that. There were lucky strikes and there were sloths. There were Jackson boys and there were lucky bastards like him. Different sides of the same coin. You tossed your luck in the air and it rattled down on the gambling boards and you either lived or died. "It's the fates," Pima's mother muttered. "They've taken you now. No telling what they'll do with you." She was staring at him with an expression that almost looked like sadness. He wanted to ask her what she meant, but Pima came in through the door with the rest of the crew. "Hey, hey," Pima said. "Look at our crew boy." She inspected his puckered wounds and stitches. "You'll get some nice scars out of this, Naylor." "Lucky scars," said Moon Girl. "Even better than a tattoo of the Rust Saint's face." She handed him a bottle. "What's this?" Naylor asked. Moon Girl shrugged. "Luck gift. God's got you tight now. I'm getting close to God." Naylor smiled and sipped, was surprised at the quality of alcohol that burned his mouth. Pima laughed. "It's Black Ling." She leaned close. "Tick-Tock stole it. Crazy lice spider just walked out of Chen's noodle shack with it. He's got no sense, but he's got fast hands." She pulled him toward the shore. "We got a fire going. Let's go get drunk." "What about work tomorrow?" "Bappy says that storm's coming for sure," she grinned. "We can strip wire with a hangover, no problem." The crew gathered around the bonfire, swapping drinks. Pima went away and came back a little while later with a pot of rice and beans, and then surprised Naylor again with a stick of grilled pigeon. At his look of surprise, she said, "Other people want to get close to God and the fates. People saw you come out of the ship. No one gets luck like that." He didn't question any more, but ate greedily, glad to be alive and eating so well. They drank, passing around the rusty shiv that had nearly killed him. Considered the possibilities of turning it into a talisman, a decoration to hang around his neck. The buzz of alcohol warmed him, made the world seem even better than before. He was alive. His skin sang with life. Even the pain in his back and shoulder where the shiv had driven into him felt good. Being close to death had made everything in his life shine. He rolled his shoulder, savoring the pain. Pima watched him across the firelight. "You think you can crew tomorrow?" Naylor made himself nod. "It's just stripping wire." "Who we getting for Scuttle Duct?" Moon Girl asked. Pima grimaced. "I thought it was going to be Sloth." Got to swear in someone new to replace her. Get bloody with someone. Lot of good that does, Tick-Tock muttered. Yeah, well, some people still keep their word. They all looked down the beach to where Sloth had been dumped. She'd be hungry soon, and needing someone to protect her. Someone to share scavenge with, to cover her back when she couldn't work. The beach was a hard place to survive without crew. Naylor stared at the bonfires, thinking about the nature of luck. One quick decision by Sloth, and everything about her future was decided. She didn't have many options now, and all of them were ugly, full of blood and pain and desperation. He took another swig from the bottle, wondering if he pitied her despite what she'd done. We could bring Tila on, Pearlie suggested. She's small. She's got a club foot, Moon Girl said. How fast can she move? For light crew, she'd hustle. I'll decide later, Pima said. Maybe Naylor heals quick, and we don't need a scuttle duck replacement. Naylor smiled sourly. Or Bappy cuts me out and sells my slot. Then none of us get to choose. Not over my head. No one said anything. It was too good a night to spoil it with bad speculation. Bappy would do whatever he wanted, but they didn't need to pick that scab tonight. Pima seemed to sense their doubts. I talked to Boss Man already, she insisted. Naylor's got a couple days free, on the Boss Man's quota. Even Bappy wants to get close to luck like his. He's not pissed that I lost that crude to other crews? Well, that too. But the wire came out with you, so he was happy about that. You got your heel time. Rust Saint's my witness. It almost sounded good enough to believe. Naylor took another drink. He'd seen enough adult promises turn out to just be wishes that he wasn't going to hold his breath, though. He needed to be crewing tomorrow, and he needed to look useful fast. He carefully worked his shoulder, willing it to get better. A couple days wire stripping would be a blessing. If anything out of this whole mess was lucky, it was that a storm was coming. Then again, without the storm, he wouldn't have been back in the hole twice on the same day. Naylor drank again, enjoying the view of the beach. In the night, you couldn't even see the oil slicks on the water, just the liquid silver reflections of the moon. Far out on the distant water, a few red and green lights glowed like fairy fire, the running lights of clipper ships crossing the Gulf. The sailing ships slid silently across the horizon, blown so fast that their lights disappeared over the curve of the earth within minutes. He tried to imagine standing on the deck of one of those ships, leaving the beach and light crew behind, sailing free and fast. Pima took the booze bottle from him. Daydreaming? Night dreaming, Naylor nodded out at the colored lights. You ever sail on one? A clipper? Pima shook her head. No way. Saw one dock once. They had a whole bunch of half-men for guards. Wouldn't let beach trash paddle close, she grimaced. The dog faces put electricity in the water. Tick-Tock laughed. I remember that. I tried to swim out and started tingling all over. Pima scowled. And then we had to drag you back like a dead fish. Almost got us all zapped. I would have been fine. Moon Girl snorted. The dog faces would have eaten you alive. That's how they do. Don't even cook their meat. Those monsters always tear in raw. If we left you out there, they'd have been using your ribs for toothpicks. Grind that. There's a half-man who muscles for Lucky Strike. What's its name? Tick-Tock halted briefly, stymied. Anyway, I've seen it. It's got big damn teeth, but it don't eat people. How would you know? The ones it eats aren't around to bitch anymore. Goats, Pima said suddenly. A half-man eats goats. When he first showed up on the beach, they paid him goats to work heavy crew. My mom told me he could eat a whole goat in 3 days. She made a face. Moon Girl's right. You don't want to tangle with those monsters. You never know when their animal side will try to take your arm off. Naylor was still watching the lights moving out in the deeps. You ever wonder what it would be like to ride a clipper? Get out on one of those things? I don't know, Pima shook her head. Fast, I guess. Damn fast, Moon Girl supplied. Red rip fast, Pearlie said. They were all looking out at the water now, hungry. You think they even know we're here? Moon Girl asked. Pima spat in the sand. We're just flies on garbage to people like that. The lights kept moving. Naylor tried to imagine what it would be like to stand on deck, hurtling across the waves, blasting through spray. He'd spent evenings staring at images of clippers under sail, pictures that he had stolen from magazines that Bappy kept in a drawer in his supervisor's shack. But that was as close as he'd ever gotten. He had spent hours poring over those sleek, predatory lines, studying the sails and hydrofoils, the smooth, engineered surfaces so different from the rusting wrecks he worked every day, staring at the beautiful people who smiled and drank on the decks. The ships whispered promises of speed and salt air and open horizons. Sometimes Naylor wished he could simply step through the pages and escape onto the prow of a clipper, sailing away in his imagination from the daily mangle of ship-breaking life. Other times, he tore the pictures up and threw them away, hating that they made him hungry for things he hadn't known he'd wanted until he'd seen the sails. The wind shifted. A black cloud of smelting smoke blew over the beach, enveloping them in haze and ash. Everyone started coughing and choking, trying to get some clean air. The wind shifted again, but Naylor kept coughing. His time in the oil room had hurt him. His chest and lungs still felt tender, and the taste of oil lingered in his mouth. By the time Naylor looked up from his coughing, the clipper ships were gone. More smelting smoke blew across their campfire. Naylor smiled bitterly in the acrid wind. That was what thinking about clipper ships got you. A lungful of smoke because you weren't paying attention to what was around. He took another swig from his bottle and passed it to Pearlie. Thanks for the luck gift, he said. I never knew Black Ling was so damn fine. Moon Girl smiled. Damn fine drink for a damn lucky bastard. He's lucky all right, Pima said. Luckiest bastard I ever saw. She inspected the other luck offerings that had accumulated over the night. Another stick of pigeon that Naylor offered around to the group. A pack of hand-rolled cigarettes. A bottle of cheap liquor from Jim Thompson's still, a thick silver earring, wide board, a sea-polished shell, a half-kilo sack of rice. Luckier than Lucky Strike? Naylor teased. Not after you lost all that oil, Moon Girl said. If you were Lucky Strike, you'd have figured out how to sneak it out, instead of wasting it. Be a big rich man now, owning the beach. The others grunted agreement, but Pima had gone still, her black skin a shadow. No one's that lucky, she said bitterly. Everyone daydreaming about being the next Lucky Strike is what made sloth go bad. Yeah, well, Naylor shrugged. I still feel lucky today. Pima made a face. You weren't just lucky, she said. You were smart. And Lucky Strike, he was smart too. Half the crews out here find some cachet of oil or copper or whatever, and none of them figure out what to do with it. Crew boss grabs it in the end, and they get bumped off the wrecks. Shit. She took another swig from the bottle and wiped her lips on her arm before passing it on to Moon Girl, who drank and coughed. Luck isn't what you need out here, Pima said. Smarts is what you need. Luck or smarts, I don't care, as long as I'm not dead. Cheers to that. Still, we get all excited about being like Lucky Strike and we lose our heads. We waste all our money throwing dice, trying to get close to luck, trying to get the big win. We pray to the Rust Saint to help us find something we can keep for ourselves. Hell, even my mom puts good rice on the scavenge god's scale for a luck offering, and we just end up like Sloth. Pima nodded down the beach to where men from the heavy crew had started their bonfires. Nailshed girls were with them, laughing and teasing them, twining slender arms around the men's waists, urging them to drink and spend. Sloth's down there now. I saw her. Dreaming about a Lucky Strike got her nothing except shame cuts through her crew tattoos, and a whole lot of bad company. Naylor studied the men's bonfire. You think she'll come after me? I would, Pima said. She's got nothing to lose now. She nodded at Naylor's luck gifts. You better find a good place to stash all that. She'll probably try to steal it. Maybe she finds some sugar daddy down there to take her under his wing, but no one else is going to deal with her. Grub shacks won't take her because the shipbreakers won't buy anything from someone with slashed crew tats. Smelter clans definitely won't touch an oathbreaker. Liar like that, she's out of options. Moon Girl said. She could sell off a kidney, maybe tap out a couple pints of blood for the harvesters. They're always buying. Sure, she's got those pretty eyes, Pearlie said. Harvesters would take those in a second. Pima shrugged. Medical buyers can slice and dice her like a side of pork, but after a while everyone runs out of pieces. Then what? Life cult, Naylor suggested. They'd buy her eggs. Just what we need. Moon Girl made a face. Bunch of half-men that look like Sloth. Dog DNA would be a step up for her, Pearlie said. At least dogs are loyal. They all laughed darkly. Started joking about which animals would enhance Sloth's genetic makeup. Roosters at least woke up early. Crawdads were good eating. Snakes were perfect for ductwork. And they didn't have hands, so they couldn't stab you in the back. Every animal they considered was an improvement over the creature who had betrayed them. Shipbreaking was too dangerous to not have trust. Sloth's about to hit a dead end, Pima said. But we've got the same problem. Maybe not this year, but soon, she shrugged. My mom's feeding me extra, trying to get me so I can compete into heavy crew. She hesitated, looked down the beach again to the bonfires and the men. I don't think I'm going to make it. Too big for light crew, too small for heavy crew. What happens then? How many clans are taking kids who aren't their own? It's bullshit, Pearlie said. You shouldn't have to quit light crew. You do better scavenge than anyone on the ship. You could take Bappy's job in a second, take out slack and double quota. He snapped his fingers. Just like that. You could take Bappy's job for sure. Pima smiled. There's a long line for that job, and it don't start with us. You've got to buy in big time, and none of us has that kind of cash. It's stupid, Pearlie said. You'd be a better crew boss. Yeah, Pima grimaced. That's where the luck comes in, I guess. She looked around at them seriously. You should remember that, all of you. If you're just smart or just lucky, it's not worth a copper yard. You got to have both, or you're just like Sloth down at those bonfires, begging for someone to find a use for you. She took another swig from the bottle and handed it back. Stood up. I got to get some sleep. She headed down the beach, calling back over her shoulder to Naylor. See you tomorrow, lucky boy. And be on time. Bappy will cut you for sure if you don't show up and sweat with the rest of us." Naylor and the rest of the crew watched her go. The last log in the fire crackled, sending sparks. Moon Girl reached into the flame, quickly turning the log deeper into the coals. "There's no way she'll make heavy crew," she said. "No way any of us do." "You trying to spoil the night?" Pearlie asked. Moon Girl's pierced features glittered in the firelight. "Just saying what we all know. Pima's worth 10 of Bappy, but it don't matter. Another year, she's got the same problem as Sloth. It's luck or nothing." She held up a blue glass fates amulet she kept around her neck. "We kiss the eye and hope things turn out, but we're all just as screwed as Sloth." "No," Tick-Tock shook his head. "The difference is that Sloth deserved it, and Pima doesn't." "Deserving doesn't have anything to do with it," Moon Girl said. "If people got what they deserved, Naylor's mom would be alive. Pima's mom would own Lawson and Carlson, and I'd be eating 6 times a day." She spit into the fire. "You don't deserve anything. Maybe Sloth was an oath breaker, but she was smart enough to know you don't deserve things. You gotta take them." "I don't buy that." Pearlie shook his head. "What have you got without your promises? You're nothing. Less than nothing." Naylor said, "You didn't see that oil, Pearlie. It was the biggest lucky strike I ever saw. We can all pretend like we aren't like Sloth, but you never saw so much oil for the taking in all your life. It would turn anyone into an oath breaker." "Not me," Pearlie said vehemently. "Sure, none of us," Naylor said. "But you still weren't there." "Not Pima," Tick-Tock said. "Never her." And that killed the discussion, because whatever other lies they told themselves, Tick-Tock was right. Pima never wavered. She never broke, and she always had your back. Even when she was bitching at you to make quota, she always kept you safe. Naylor suddenly wished he could give all his luck to her. If anyone deserved something better, it was her. Depressed by the turn of conversation, people started gathering the leavings of their meal, dousing the beech wood with sand, and getting ready to return to whatever families or caretakers or safe flops they had. The wind blew over them, and Naylor turned into the freshening breeze. The storm was coming for sure. He had enough experience on the coast to have the sense of it. It was out there, coming in. A good big blow. It could shut down work for a couple days at least, maybe give him a chance to rest up and heal. He inhaled the fresh salty air as it poured over him. Other campfires were dousing out, and there was an increasing scurry of activity as the beach residents started tying down meager belongings in preparation for changing weather. Out on the horizon, another clipper ship was skating across the Gulf's night waters, running lights glowing blue. He took a deep breath, watching it rush for whatever port would protect it. For once, Naylor was glad to be on shore. He turned and trudged down the beach toward his own hut. If he was really lucky, his father would be out drinking and he'd be able to slip in unnoticed. Naylor's home lay at the margin of the jungle, surrounded by kudzu vines and cypress. Made of palm sheathing and bamboo struts and scavenged sheep tin that his father had tagged with his fist mark to make sure nobody scavenged it while they were away during the day. Naylor set his luck gifts outside the door. He could almost remember times when this door hadn't seemed dangerous. Before his mother went feverish. Before his father turned drunk and high. Now, opening the door was always a gamble. If it weren't for the fact that Naylor was wearing loaned clothes, he wouldn't even risk the return. But still, his other set of clothes lay inside, and if he was lucky, his dad was still out drinking. He scraped open the door and padded through the interior darkness, opened the jar of glow paint and smeared a bit on his forehead. The phosphorescence gave dim shadows. A match flared. Naylor whirled. His father leaned against the wall behind the door, watching him, a nearly empty bottle of booze gripped in one fist. "Good to see you, Naylor." Richard Lopez was a rib-thin conglomeration of ropey muscle and burning energy. Tattooed dragons ran the length of his arms and sent their tails curling up his neck to twine with the faded patterns of his own long-ago light crew tattoos. Fresher and far more ominous, a whole series of victory scars gleamed on his chest, showing all the men he'd broken when he'd been a ring fighter. 13 red and angry slashes there. His very own baker's dozen, he would say, grinning. And then he'd ask Naylor if he was ever going to be as tough as his old man. Richard lit the storm lamp that hung overhead, setting it swaying. Naylor held still, trying to guess his father's mood as the man pulled a scavenged chair around and straddled it. The lamp's swinging glare cast shadows across them both, looming and swooping shapes. Richard Lopez was sliding high, burning with amphetamines and liquor. His bloodshot eyes studied Naylor carefully, a snake waiting to strike. "What the hell happened to you?" Naylor tried not to show fear. The man didn't have anything in his hands, no knife, no belt, no willow whip. His blue eyes might be crystal bright, but he was still a calm ocean. "I had an accident on the job," Naylor said. "An accident? Or were you being stupid?" "No." "Thinking about girls?" his dad pressed. "Thinking about nothing at all? Daydreaming like you do?" He jerked his head toward the torn image of a clipper ship that Naylor had tacked to the wall of their shack. "Thinking about your pretty sailing ships?" Naylor didn't take the bait. If he protested, it would just make things worse. His father said, "How you going to pay your way around here if you're off your crew?" "I'm not off," Naylor said. "I'm back tomorrow." "Yeah?" His father's bloodshot eyes narrowed suspiciously. He nodded at the rag sling holding Naylor's shoulder. "With a gimp arm? Bappy doesn't do charity work." Naylor forced himself not to back down. "I'm still good. Sloth got cut, so I got no competition in the ducks. I'm smaller." "Smaller than shit. Yeah, you got that going for you." His father took a swallow from his bottle. "Where's your filter mask?" he asked. Naylor hesitated. "Well?" "I lost it." Silence stretched between them. "Lost it, huh?" was all his father said. But Naylor could tell that dangerous gears were turning now, fueled by the rattle of drugs and anger and whatever madness caused his father's bouts of frenzied work and brutality. Underneath the man's tattooed features a storm was brewing, full of undertows and crashing surf and water spouts. The deadly weather that buffeted Naylor every day as he tried to navigate the coastline of his father's moods. Richard Lopez was thinking, and now Naylor needed to know what, or he'd never escape the shack without a beating. Naylor tried an explanation. "I fell through a duct and into an oil pocket. Couldn't get out. The mask couldn't breathe anyway. It was full of oil. It was done for." "Don't tell me it was done for," his father snapped. "That's not your say." "No, sir." Naylor waited wary. Richard Lopez tapped his booze bottle idly against the back of the chair. "I'll bet you want another mask now. You were always complaining about the dust with that old one." "No, sir," Naylor said again. "No, sir," his father mimicked. "Damn, Naylor, you're a smart one these days. Always saying the right thing." He smiled, showing yellow teeth all splayed out like a hand, but still the bottle tapped against the back of the chair. Naylor wondered if his father was going to try to hit him with it. The bottle tapped again. Richard Lopez's predatory eyes studied Naylor. "You're a smart little bastard these days. he murmured. I'm almost thinking you're getting too damn smart for your own good. Maybe you're starting to say things you don't mean. Yes, sir. No, sir. Sir. Naylor could barely breathe. He knew now that his father was mapping out the violence, planning to catch Naylor, to teach him some respect. Naylor's eyes went to the door. Even with his father sliding high, the man had a good chance of catching him, and then everything would be blood and bruises, and there was no way he'd get back on to light crew before Bappy cut him. Naylor cursed that he hadn't just gone straight to the safety of Pima's shack. His eyes went to the door again. If he could just... Richard caught the flick of Naylor's gaze. The man's features turned cold. He stood and pushed his chair away. Come here, boy. I got a luck gift, Naylor said suddenly. A good one. For getting out of the oil. Naylor kept his voice steady, trying to pretend he didn't know his father was planning on beating the hell out of him, playing innocent, talking normal, like there wasn't about to be pain and screaming and a chase. It's right here, he said. Walk slow. Don't make him think you're running. It's just right here, Naylor said again as he opened the door and reached outside. He grabbed Moon Girl's luck gift and offered it to his dad. The bottle gleamed in the lamplight, a talisman. Black Ling, Naylor said. The crew gave it to me. Said I should share it with you, because I'm lucky for you having me. Naylor held his breath. His father's cold eyes went to the bottle. Maybe his father would drink, or maybe he'd take the bottle and hit him with it. Naylor just didn't know. The man had become more unpredictable as he worked less on the cruise and worked more in the shadow world of the beaches, as his drugs whittled him down to a burning core of violence and hungers. Let me see. His dad took the bottle from Naylor's hand and checked the level of liquor. Didn't leave much for your old man, he complained. But he cracked the screw and sniffed the contents. Naylor waited, praying for luck. His father drank, made a face of respect. Good stuff, he said. The violence seeped out of the room. His father grinned and toasted Naylor with the bottle. Damn good stuff. He tossed his other bottle into the corner. Way better than that swill. Naylor ventured a smile. Glad you like it. His father drank again and wiped his mouth. Get to bed. You've got crew tomorrow. Bappy will cut you for sure if you're late. He waved Naylor toward his blankets. Lucky boy, you. He grinned again. Maybe that's what we'll call you from now on. Lucky boy. The man's yellow horse teeth flashed, suddenly benevolent. You like the name Lucky Boy? He asked. Naylor nodded hesitantly. Yeah, I like it. He made himself smile wider, willing to say anything to keep his father in this new good mood. I like it a lot. Good. His father nodded, satisfied. Go to bed, Lucky Boy. His father took another swallow from Naylor's luck gift and settled down to watch the storm as it rolled toward them. Naylor pulled a dirty sheet over himself. From the far side of the room, his old man muttered, You did good. Naylor felt a flush of relief at the compliment. It carried with it the whiff of a father that he remembered from before, when he was small and his mother was still alive. A different time, a different father. In the dim light, Richard Lopez could almost be the man who had helped Naylor carve the rust saint's image into the wall above his mother's sickbed. But that had been a long time ago. Naylor curled in on himself, glad to feel safe for the night. Tomorrow might be different, but this day had ended well. Tomorrow would handle itself. Chapter 6. The storm rolled onto the coast with all the implacable power of an old-world tank. Towering cloud banks built on the horizon and then swept inward, bearing steady rain. Thunder grumbled over the ocean, and lightning lit the underbellies of the clouds, flashing from sea to sky and back again. The deluge opened. Naylor woke to the roar of storm on bamboo walls. Wind and water poured in through the open door, lit by explosions of electricity. His father was just a shadow slumped beside him, mouth open, snoring. Wind whirled through the house, scraping Naylor's face with cold fingers, then leaping to the wall and tearing away Naylor's picture of the clipper ship. The paper swirled madly for a moment before being sucked out the window into darkness, disappearing before Naylor could even try to grab it. Rain spattered his skin, coming in cold where palm thatching was already tearing away under the increasing battery of the winds. Naylor crawled over his father and stumbled to the door. Outside, the beach swarmed with activity, people moving skiffs deeper into the trees, chasing after livestock. The storm looked worse than just a blow, maybe a city killer even, the way the clouds swirled and scattered lightning across the wrecks offshore. Even though the tide should have been out, the waves and breakers were big all across the beach, the storm surge pressing inland. His father claimed that the storms were worse every year, but Naylor had never seen anything like the monster bearing down on them. He turned back into the shack. "Dad," he shouted, "everyone's moving higher. We need to get out of the surge." His father didn't respond. The night crews were pouring off the wrecks, men and women scrambling down hemp ladders, dangling and dropping like fleas jumping from a dog, plummeting into the increasing surf. Electricity outlined the black hulks against day-bright sky. Then everything disappeared into blackness. Rain slashed the beach. Naylor scrambled around the shack, looking for possessions to salvage. He tugged on his last set of clothes, grabbed the phosphor grease, found the silver earring and the luck bag of rice that he'd been given. The house creaked and heeled as wind gusted. The tin and bamboo wouldn't last long. The storm was a city killer for sure, what some people called a party wrecker or an Orleans surge. When Naylor peered back out into the storm's rage, he could see now that everyone was fleeing for heavy shelter. Shadow people clawed out of the darkness, hunched against curtains of wind and water as they dashed for safety, running for things like the salvage train with its iron freight cars that might not fly away. Naylor dragged all their possessions over to his father's inert form. He pulled the sheet off the bed and fumbled one-handed with their belongings. His wounded shoulder burned with pain at the frantic effort. He shoved everything into the sheet and tied it in a bundle. More rain poured through the disintegrating thatch. His father's pale skin gleamed with rainwater, and yet still he didn't move. Naylor grabbed a tattooed arm. "Dad!" No response. "Dad!" Naylor shook him again, tried to drive his nails into the man's dragon-decorated flesh. "Wake up!" The man barely stirred, sunk so deep in amphetamine blowout that nothing affected him. Naylor rocked back on his heels, suddenly thoughtful. If they took the full brunt of the city killer, there wouldn't be anything left here. He'd heard that sometimes a surge could move the coastline inland as much as a mile, turning beaches and trees into a murky swamp sea, the new ragged tide line of rising sea levels. A big blow could easily move the hulks of the ships as well, might shove them right over the house, even if it didn't blow away. Naylor straightened. He hefted the sheet, groaning at the cumbersome load. When he reached the doorway, the wind blasted him, lashing his face with rain and sand and leaves. More lightning slashed the beach. In the flickering light, a chicken coop tumbled past, all the birds already gone, every one of them lost to the gray roar. Naylor looked back at his father, conflicted emotions warring within him. The man wasn't moving. The chemicals in his brain were so depleted he wasn't going to come awake even for the storm. Sometimes when the crash was bad, his father could sleep for 2 days. Naylor normally blessed the peace his father's drug crashes brought. It would be so much simpler. Naylor set down the sack of possessions. Cursing himself for his own stupidity, he plunged into the storm. The man was a drunk and a bastard, but still they were blood. They shared the same eyes, the same memories of his mother, the same food, the same liquor. Family, as much as he had. A maelstrom of sand and copper screws and plastic shards swirled around him, the debris of the shipbreaking business ripping at his skin as he ran barefoot down the beach to Pima's shack. Rust flakes, bits of insulation, a roll of wire, trash strippings flying like knives. A gust of wind drove Naylor to his knees and sent him crawling, his shoulder a bright blossom of pain. Sheet metal whipped overhead, flying like a kite. A roof, a bit of ship. It was impossible to tell. It slashed into a coconut palm and the tree toppled, but the blast of the storm was so loud Naylor couldn't hear the collapse. Crouched on the sand, he squinted through gushing rain. Pima's shack was gone, but the shadows of the girl and her mother were still there, fighting the storm, trailing ropes, struggling to hold on to a blurry shadow. Naylor had always thought of Pima's mother as big from her work on the heavy crew, but now in the storm she seemed as small as sloth. The rain cleared briefly. Sodna and Pima were lashing down a skiff, tying it to a tree trunk as it bent in the wind. Debris scoured them. When he got close, he could see that Pima had taken a cut to her face, and blood ran freely from her forehead even as she worked with her mother to secure the lines. "Naylor!" Pima's mother waved him over. "Help Pima! Hold that side!" She threw him a line. He twisted it around his good arm and hauled, the two of them handling one end of the skiff, shoulder to shoulder as Pima made the knots fast. As soon as it was knotted, Pima's mother motioned him and shouted, "Get up into the trees! There's a rock hollow higher up! It should give shelter!" Naylor shook his head. "My dad!" He waved back at his own shack, a shadow still miraculously upright. "He won't wake up!" Pima's mother stared through the blackness and rain toward the shack. Her lips pursed. "Hale! All right!" She waved at Pima. "You take him up!" The last thing Naylor saw was Sodna's shadow plunging into the wind, running down the beach, surrounded by lightning strikes. And then Pima was dragging him up into the trees, scrambling through the whipping branches in the roar of the storm. They climbed wildly, desperate to get out of the surge. Naylor looked back again at the beach and saw nothing. Pima's mother was gone. His father's shack, everything. The beach was scoured clean. Out on the water, fires burned. Oils somehow ignited and blazing despite the torrents. "Come on!" Pima tugged him onward. "It's still a long way!" They fled deeper into the jungle, scrambling through mud and stumbling over thick cypress roots. Torrents of water rushed down over them, filling the wood-cutting trails of the forest with their own muddy rivers. At last they reached Pima's destination, a small limestone cave, barely big enough to hold them both. They crouched within. Rainwater poured over the brink in a miserable torrent. It pooled around them so that they huddled ankle-deep in cold water. Still, it was sheltered from the wind. Naylor stared out at the storm. A city killer for sure. "Pima," he started. Shh." She pulled him back from the water, deeper into the hole. "She'll be fine. She's tough. Tougher than any storm." A tree flew past, flying as if it were a toothpick flung by a child. Naylor bit his lip. He hoped Pima was right. He'd been a fool to ask for help. Pima's mother was worth 100 of his dad. They waited, shivering. Pima tugged him closer and they huddled together, sharing heat, waiting for nature's violence to pass. Chapter 7. The storm raged for 2 nights, thrashing the coastline, tearing away anything that wasn't tied down. Pima and Naylor huddled through it, watching the roar and rain and holding close as their lips turned purple and their skins pimpled with cold. On the 3rd day, in the morning, the sky suddenly cleared. Naylor and Pima forced their stiff limbs to move and stumbled down to the beach, joining a ragged assemblage of other survivors who were streaming toward the sands. They broke through the last of the trees, and Naylor stopped, dumbstruck. The beach was empty, not a sign of human habitation. Out in the blue water, the shadows of the tankers still loomed, randomly scattered like toys, but nothing else remained. The soot was gone, the oil in the waters, everything shone brightly under the blaze of morning tropic sun. "It's so blue," Pima murmured. "I don't think I've ever seen the water so blue." Naylor couldn't speak. The beach was cleaner than he'd ever seen in his life. "You're alive, huh?" Moon Girl grinning at them. Covered with mud from whatever bolt hole she'd found, but alive nonetheless. Behind her, Pearlie and his parents were coming onto the beach, shocked expressions on their faces as they tried to register the changes. "All in one piece." Pima searched down the beach. "You see my mom?" Moon Girl shook her head, her piercings glinting in the sun. "She might be over there." She waved vaguely toward the train yard. "Lucky Strike's giving out food to anyone who wants it. Credit for everyone until the shipbreaking starts again." "He saved food?" "Couple rail cars full." Pima tugged Naylor. "Come on." A crowd of people were gathered around the scavenge train, all of them waiting for Lucky Strike to dole out supplies. Pima and Naylor scanned the faces, but there was no sign of Sodna. Lucky Strike was laughing and saying, "No worries, we got enough for everyone. No one's starving while we wait for old Lawson and Carlson to come back from Mismet. The rust buyers might be hiding from hurricanes, but Lucky Strike's taking care of everyone." Lucky Strike was grinning, his long black dreadlocks tied back, but Naylor knew he was also telling people there wouldn't be any rioting for food. And if there was anyone people would obey, it was Lucky Strike. Lucky Strike had been collecting real power ever since his first bit of luck freed him from heavy crew. Now he smuggled everything from antibiotics to Crystal Slide into Bright Sands Beach. He had deals worked with the boss men to do whatever he liked. His hand was in the gambling dens and the nail sheds and a dozen other businesses, and the money just rolled in, turning into gold nuggets that he hung glittering from the tips of his dreadlocks, or else drove through his ears in thick, gleaming rings. The man dripped wealth. "Keep back," Lucky Strike shouted. "Keep on back." He was smiling and looked confident, but he had a line of hired goons standing behind him to back up his authority. Naylor scanned the arrayed thugs, recognizing some of the killers that his father ran with. It seemed like Lucky Strike had collected the best of the worst for his protection. Even the half-man was there. The monster's huge muscled form loomed over the rest of the thugs, its dog-like muzzle snarling and showing its teeth to scare back the hungry people. Pima caught the direction of Naylor's gaze. "That's the one my mom's heavy crew used to pull sheet iron. Said he could lift 4 times what a man could." "What's it doing up there?" "Must have figured out that working muscle for Lucky Strike pays better than heavy crew." The half-man bared its fangs again and rumbled a warning. The crowds that had been closing in on the train cars backed off. Lucky Strike laughed. "Well, at least you all listen to my killer dog, huh? That's right. Everybody step back, or my friend Tool here will teach you a lesson in manners. I mean it. Everyone, give us some space. If Tool doesn't like you, he'll eat you raw. The crowd mumbled discontent, but they gave way under Tool's gaze. Pima! Naylor and Pima turned at the shout. It was Sodna, hurrying toward them, Naylor's father in tow. Sodna swept up to hug Pima. Naylor's father halted a step behind. He inclined his head. Guess you saved my ass, lucky boy. Naylor nodded carefully. Guess so. Suddenly his father laughed and grabbed him. Damn, boy. You're not going to hug your old man? It hurt Naylor's stitches, and Naylor winced in the man's grip, but he didn't fight the embrace. His dad said, I woke up in the middle of that damn storm and had no idea what the hell was going on. Almost killed Sodna before she explained things. Naylor glanced worriedly at Pima's mother, but Sodna just shrugged. We worked it out. Damn right. His dad grinned and touched his jaw. She hits like a sledgehammer. For a moment, Naylor worried that his father was carrying a grudge, but for once the man wasn't sliding high. He seemed almost rational, as clean as the beach. Already he was craning his neck to see how food was being distributed. Tool's up there. He laughed and clapped Naylor on the shoulder. If Lucky Strike will hire that dog, damn sure he'll take me. We'll eat good tonight. He began shoving through the crowd toward Lucky Strike's guard detail. He didn't look back at Sodna or Naylor or Pima at all. Naylor breathed a sigh of relief. No hard feelings then. The inventory of the beach and the shipbreakers continued. Rumor had it that they'd missed the heart of the storm. It had passed to their east, up Orleans Alley, roaring through the old city ruins and then tearing farther north into the sea wreckage of Orleans 2. Damage all the way up through the guts of the place, people said, which meant that they'd been lucky at Bright Sands and missed being flattened. Even with a glancing blow from the storm, the damage to Bright Sands Beach was immense. They found bodies everywhere, tangled in kudzu vines of the jungle, stuck in the trees high up, floating out in the surf. Lucky Strike organized scavenge parties to take care of the dead, burning them or burying them according to their rituals, and making the place safe from disease. Names rolled in. Bappy had gone missing, either torn apart in the storm or drowned, but gone nonetheless. No one knew if Sloth was alive or dead. Tick-Tock and his entire family were found. No sign of damage on them, but all of them dead anyway. All the scrap and rust buyers who contracted with Lawson and Carlson had fled inland to wait out the storm. With no companies like GE buying scrap for their manufacturing operations, or shipping companies like Patel Global Transit looking to buy scavenge to sell overseas, the shipbreaking yards were idle. The accountants and assayers and corporate guards who weighed and purchased the raw materials that came off the wrecks had left, and with no one around to buy their product, the shipbreakers used their days cutting and renewing their shacks, scavenging the jungle, and fishing for food in the ocean. Until things got organized, people were on their own. Pima and Naylor went scavenging for food, collecting green coconuts that had fallen, before turning to the pools and tides. Out in the distance, the outcrop point of an island was visible. There's crabs out that way, Pima said. Yeah? Should we go that far? Pima shrugged. Better scavenge without competition, right? She indicated the silent ships. It's not like anyone's going to miss us. They took a hemp sack and a bucket and went seeking, working their way across the sand, out along the spit that led to the island. All around, the ocean was a glittering mirror. Breakers rolled up to the shore, white as a baby's teeth. The black hulks of the broken ships stood out in the sun, looming monuments to a world that had fallen apart. Far out on the horizon, a clipper ship skated the ocean, its high sail unfurled. Naylor paused in his collections and watched as it carved across the blue water. So close, and yet so far. "You going to keep daydreaming there?" Pima asked. "Sorry." Naylor bent and ran his hand through another tide pool, wincing a little at the movement, but still feeling better than he had in days. His bruises were almost all faded, even if his arm was still in a sling, and even if there was an annoying burn of soreness in his shoulder. They continued out along the promontory. In places they could look down through clear waters and see where old houses had been built, their concrete foundations showing in the deeps. "Check it out," Pima said, pointing. "That one must have been a huge house." "If they were so rich," Naylor asked, "why did they build where they were going to get drowned?" "Hell if I know. Even rich people are stupid, I guess." Pima pointed out deeper into the bay. "Not as stupid as the ones who made the teeth, though." The waters over the teeth were calm, a light breeze rippling across them. A few black struts and chunks of construction protruded up through the waves. Beneath the surface, tall brick and steel buildings lurked, their crumbling structures hidden by the water. The people who had built the teeth had misjudged the sea rise quite a lot. The only time any of their buildings showed was at low tide. The rest of the time, the city ruins were entirely hidden. "You ever wonder if there's any good scavenge down there?" Naylor asked. "Not really. People had plenty of time to strip the easy stuff." "Yeah, but still, there must be some iron and steel we could recover. Stuff that wasn't so scarce when they gave up." "No one's going after rusty steel when we've got all these ships to gut." "Yeah, I guess so." Still, it galled him to think of what wealth might lie beneath the waves. They waded around the rich people's ruins and continued across the spit, aiming for the green tuft of the island. The last bit of distance was a wide sand plain, revealed in low tide, and made easy walking. They reached the island and climbed up through trees and kudzu vines and bushes, making good time, even with Naylor's bad shoulder. They crested the island. The wide blue ocean came into view. It was almost as if they were out in the middle of the ocean now, so far offshore. With the wind coming off the water, Naylor could pretend he was actually on a deep-sea vessel, speeding toward the horizon. He stared out to the curve of the earth, to the far side of the world. "Wish you were here," Pima murmured. "Yeah." This was as close as he would ever come to the deep ocean. If he thought about it too much, it hurt. Some people were born lucky and sailed on clipper ships. And then there were beach rats like him and Pima. Naylor tore his eyes from the horizon and scanned the bay. In the deep water, the shadows of the teeth undulated. Sometimes ships caught on the teeth if they weren't familiar with the local coast. He'd seen a fisher hang up and sink on the old struts when it had run itself into the whole mass of towers and then been unable to win free. Some of the shipbreakers had gone down, swimming for the scavenge. Depending on tide levels, the teeth had real bite. "Come on," Pima said. "We don't want to get caught out here by the tide." Naylor followed, working his way down slope, letting Pima help him over the rough sections. "Your dad get drunk yet?" Pima asked suddenly. Naylor thought back on the morning in his father's good mood, the man sharp-eyed and laughing and ready for the day, but also jittery, the way he was when he didn't have his crystal slide or a handful of red rippers. He should be good for a while yet. Lucky Strike won't let him crack heads unless he's clean. Probably won't start until tonight. "I don't know why you saved his ass," Pima said. "All he does is hit you." Naylor shrugged. The island's undergrowth was surprisingly thick, and he had to push it aside to keep it from whipping him in the face as he forced through. He didn't used to. He used to be different. Before all the drugs and before my mom died. He wasn't that great before. He's just worse now. Naylor grimaced. Yeah, well, he shrugged, stymied by conflicted emotions. I probably wouldn't have made it out of the oil room if it weren't for him. He's the one who taught me to swim. You think I don't owe him something for that? Depends how many times a day he cracks your head. Pima made a face. You give him enough chances. He's going to kill you. Naylor didn't respond. If he thought about it too much, he didn't know why he'd saved his father either. It wasn't like Richard Lopez made his life any easier. Probably it was because people said family was important. Pearlie said it. Pima's mom said it. Everyone said it. And Richard Lopez, whatever else he was the only family Naylor had left. Still, Naylor couldn't help wishing that he'd ended up with Sodna and Pima, and not Richard Lopez. He wondered what it would be like to live in their shack all the time, and not just when his father was sliding high. To know that he wouldn't have to leave after a day or two and return to his father's place. To live with people you could count on to protect your back. The undergrowth opened. They stepped out amongst the tide pools and jagged rocks of the island's tip. Granite intrusions poked above the water and formed a sort of breakwater that defended the island from some of the worst of the new storms. Pima started scooping up storm-stunned croakers and small redfish, throwing them into her bucket. There's a lot of fish, more than I thought. Naylor didn't answer. He stared at the rocks beyond. Between them, something reflected like glass, glinting and white. Hey, Pima. He tugged her shoulder. Look at that. Pima straightened. What the hell? That's a clipper ship, isn't it? He swallowed. Took a step forward. Stopped. Was it a mirage? He kept expecting it to evaporate. The white boards and fluttering silk and canvas remained. It is. It has to be. It's a clipper. Pima laughed softly behind him. No, you're wrong, Naylor. That's not a clipper ship at all. Suddenly she dashed past him, sprinting for the ship. That's scavenge! Her laughter floated back to him on the wind, teasing him. Naylor shook himself from the stupor and dashed after her. A whoop of joy escaped his lips as he ran across the sand. Ahead, the gull-white hull of the wreck gleamed in the sunlight, beckoning. Chapter 8. The ship lay on its side, swamped and broken, its back snapped. Even destroyed, it was a beautiful thing, utterly unlike the rusting iron and steel hulks they tore apart every day. The Clipper was big, a ship used for fast transit and freight on the Pole Run, over the world to Russia and Nippon, or else across the rough Atlantic to Africa and Europe. Its hydrofoils were retracted, but with the carbon polymer hull shattered, Naylor could see into its workings. The huge gears that extended the foils, the complex hydraulics and precision electronic systems. The ship's deck was tilted toward them, showing a buckle cannon and the high-speed reels for the parasails. Once, when Bappy was in a good mood, the man had told Naylor that the big cannon could send a sail thousands of feet into the air to catch high winds that would then yank the ship up onto its hydrofoils and take it skimming across the waves at speeds faster than 50 knots. Naylor and Pima stopped short, staring at the looming wreckage. Fates, it's beautiful, Pima breathed. Even dead, it looked like a regal hawk, cracked and shattered, but with a beauty still inherent thanks to the feral grace of its lines. It had the sleek, aerodynamic design of a hunter, every angle purpose-built to reduce drag to the merest fraction. Naylor's eyes swept over the broken Clipper's upper decks, The pontoons and stabilizers and the cracked remains of the fixed-wing sails, all of it white, almost blazingly white in the sun. Not a bit of soot or rust anywhere. There wasn't a drop of oil leaking, despite the shattered hull. Back at the shipbreaking yards, the old tankers and freighters were nothing in comparison, just rusting dinosaurs, useless without the precious oil that had once fueled them. Now they were nothing but great wallowing brutes, leaking their grime and toxins into the water. Reeking and destructive when they'd been created in the accelerated age, and still destructive even after they were dead. The Clipper was something else entirely. A machine angels had built. The name on the prow was unreadable to either of them, but Pima recognized one of the words below. "It's from Boston," she said. "How do you know?" Naylor asked. "One of my light crews worked on a Boston freight ship, and it had the same word. I saw it on every single door in the whole damn wreck while we were taking it apart." "I don't remember that." "It was before you got on crew." She paused. "The first letter's B, and it's got the S, the one like a snake, so it's the same." "Wonder what happened." "Had to be the storm." "They should have known better, though. They have satellite talkies for those ships. Big eyes down on the clouds. They should never get hit." It was Pima's turn to look at Naylor. "How would you know?" "You remember old Miles?" "Didn't he die?" "Yeah. Some kind of infection got into his lungs. He used to work galley on a clipper ship, though, before he got thrown off. He knew all kinds of stuff about how clippers work. Told me they've got hulls made of special fiber, so they slide through the water like oil, and they use computers to keep level, measure water speed and wind. He definitely told me they talk to the weather satellites, just like Lawson and Carlson do for when a storm's coming." "Maybe they thought they could outrun the storm," Pima guessed. Both of them stared at the wreckage. "That's a lot of scavenge," Naylor said. "Yeah." Pima paused. "You remember what I said a couple nights ago about needing to be lucky and smart?" "Yeah." "How long you think we can keep this a secret?" She jerked her head back to the beach and the shipbreaking yards. "From all them." "Maybe a day or two," Naylor guessed, "if we're really lucky. Then someone comes out, fishing boat or a trader will spot it, even if the beach rats don't." Pima's lips compressed. "We got to claim this for us." "Fat chance." Naylor studied the broken ship. "No way we can defend a claim like this. Patrols will be looking for it. Corporate goons. Lawson and Carlson will want a piece, if it's full salvage." "It's salvage, all right," Pima interrupted. "Look at it. It's never going to move again." Naylor shook his head stubbornly. "I still don't see how we can keep it to ourselves." "My mom," Pima suggested. "She could help." "She's got heavy crew. If she disappears to come down and work on it, people will notice." Naylor glanced back toward the beach. "If we aren't back for light crew tomorrow, people are going to wonder where we are, too." He massaged his aching shoulder. "We need goons. And even if we got thug muscle, as soon as they knew about the ship, they'd take it for themselves, too." Pima chewed her lip, thoughtful. "I don't even know how to register scavenge." "Trust me, no one's going to let us register this." "What about Lucky Strike? He's got contacts with the bosses. Maybe he could do it. Keep Lawson and Carlson off us." "And he'd take it away from us, too, just like everyone else." "He's giving out food right now," Pima pointed out. "No one else is doing that. Advances for anyone who can bring two friends to vouch they're good for it once work gears up again." "We're just lice biters to him. He doesn't need rust from us. Food's one thing." Naylor stared at the wreck in frustration. So much wealth. If only they could lock it down. This is stupid. We're just weighing copper in the ducts. We have no idea what's on board. Let's go in and see what we're talking about." "Yeah," Pima shook her head. "You're right. Maybe there's something good and light we can hide. Then we'll decide about the rest. Yeah, maybe there'll be a reward for the ship if we report it." "A reward?" Naylor shrugged. "I heard about it on a radio play once. At Chen's Noodle Shack. You get bounty for helping someone out." "Why don't you just call it bounty then?" Naylor made a face. "'Cause they called it a reward," he spat. "Come on, let's check it out." They made their way over the last rocks to the ship. At low tide, the hull was surrounded by ankle-deep water. A few fish sat in pools. Others lay beached on the sand, rotting with streamers of seaweed. Up close, the ship got bigger. Not like the rusting monoliths of the accelerated age, but still, it loomed over them. Pima clambered up the shattered edge of the clipper and slipped inside, her hands fast and accomplished from years on wrecking crews. Naylor followed more slowly, hoisting himself aboard with his one good hand. The ship was on its side, so crawling through its passages was a bit like being in the ducts, an unexpected familiarity to something that should have been so different. Naylor scanned the wreckage. Glints of metal, bits of people's clothes strewn around, all kinds of junk, the stink of rotting fish. "Swank stuff," he said. He fingered a gown that looked like it was silk. "Look at this clothing." Pima made a face of dismissal. "Who needs clothes like that?" She clambered out of the hole and up onto the cant of the upper deck, scrabbling along until she found hatch access. A minute later she called, "I've found the galley," then whistled, "Come look at all this." Naylor struggled up to join her. The galley was trashed, all fallen out, but many of the bins of food were still locked in place. Rice and flour and sealed containers. Pima started unlatching drawers, bottles spilled out in a rain of broken glass and the puff of spices. She wrinkled her nose and coughed. Naylor sneezed. "Slow down, crew girl." "Sorry," she coughed again. Opened a locker. Meat spilled out. Spoiled already in the heat. Big floppy steaks, better than anything they could get anywhere on the beaches. They both put their hands over their mouths, breathing shallowly as stink enveloped them. "I think they had electric cooling in here," Naylor said. "It's the only way they could have kept all that meat." "Damn, they had it good, huh?" "Yeah. No wonder old Miles was so sad he got kicked off." "What'd he do?" "Said he was drunk, but I think he was selling Red Rippers." Pima peered inside the locker, looking to see if anything was worth saving. Pulled her head out gagging. The reek of spoiled meat was too strong. They kept going through the ship. They found the first body in one of the cabins. A shirtless man, his eyes still wide, crabs lurking in his guts. Pima turned away, gagging at the smell of death in the closed room, then peered in again. Fish flopped in a shallow pool beside the man's head. It was hard to tell if the man had drowned or if the ugly gash on his forehead had done him in, but he was dead. "Well, he won't care if we scavenge," Pima muttered. "You going to scavenge him?" Naylor asked. "He's got pockets." Naylor shook his head. "I'm not touching him." "Don't be a lice biter." Pima took a breath and crept close to the dead man. Flies exploded in a cloud, buzzing in the warmth of the room. Pima tugged at the man's pants and ran her fingers through his pockets. She was acting tough, but Naylor could tell she was unnerved. They'd both heard stories of fresh scavenge. Bodies came with the territory, but it was still scary to look into a man's dead eyes and think that he'd been walking the decks only a little while earlier, before the storm took it all away and gave it to a couple kids on the shoreline. Naylor scanned the rest of the cabin. It was big. A cracked photo on the floor showed the man wearing a white jacket with stripes on the sleeves. Naylor picked up the picture and studied it. I think this was his ship. Yeah? Naylor scanned the walls. There was an old-style spyglass secured with brackets, pieces of paper with all sorts of writing on it, seals and official-looking stamps. And then this picture of the man with the braid on his shoulder and him standing in front of a clipper ship, smiling. Naylor couldn't tell if it was the same ship as the wreck or not, but it was obvious the man was full of pride. Naylor glanced over at the bloated, torn-open corpse and blew out his breath, thoughtful. As if sensing his thoughts, Pima looked up from her work. It's all luck, Naylor. Just luck and the fates. It's all we got. She flashed scavenged coins at him meaningfully. It was enough money to feed them for a week. Copper coins and a damp wad of Chinese red paper cash. Today we're the lucky ones. Yeah, Naylor nodded. And tomorrow, maybe we're not. The captain hadn't been lucky, and now Naylor and Pima were flush because of it. Weird to think about that. The captain lay bloated, his face puffed and purpled, the sun baking and ruining his flesh. Flies buzzed easily around his face, his lips and eyes, the blood on his head, the tear in his stomach. Whole clouds settled back on him as soon as Pima stepped away. Naylor studied the cabin again, thoughtful. Brass on the walls, all kinds of scavenge. It was a swank boat, for sure. The captain's cabin was rich, and even though the ship was as large as a cargo ship, it didn't look like a working vessel. Everything seemed too nice. All silk and carpeted corridors and brass and copper and little glass lanterns. He and Pima kept going through cabins. They found carved furniture, sitting rooms, lounges, a bar with shattered liquor bottles, staterooms, art on the walls mangled and torn, oil paintings tossed about and punctured. Down below in the engineering room, where mechanical systems controlled the ship, they found more bodies. Half-men, Pima whispered. A trio of them, bloated and drowned. Their bestial faces looked weirdly hungry, with their long tongues hanging out of their sharp-toothed mouths. Yellow dog eyes stared dead at Pima and Naylor, gleaming dully in the tropical sunbeams that penetrated the torn room. These people must have been damn swank if they could afford all these half-men. That one looks like you, Naylor commented. You sure you haven't been selling eggs? Pima snorted laughter and jabbed an elbow into his ribs, but even she didn't suggest scavenging them. There was something just too creepy about the genetically designed creatures to consider getting close to them. Naylor and Pima split up and continued to explore the ship. Pima found another dead half-man in the upper decks, strapped to the wheel and drowned. So much death, Naylor thought. The people must have been complete idiots to get caught in a city killer. He shoved open another door and whistled, low and surprised. A table tilted on its side, crammed against the wall, dark black wood as deep as night. Shattered glass everywhere, goblets thrown about. Pima, check this out! She came running. The room was loaded with silver. Silver candlesticks, silver tableware, silver platters, silver bowls. A huge lucky strike, all for the taking. That's a lot of scavenge, Pina gasped. That's enough to pay off all our work debts. With that much cash, you could set up scavenge on your own, even buy Bappy's light cruise lot. Come on, Pina said. Let's clear it out before anyone else shows up. We're rich, lucky boy. She grabbed him and kissed him right, left, and full on the lips, laughing at his surprised expression. Oh, lucky boy, we're rich. We're gonna be bigger than Lucky Strike. Infected by her spirit, Naylor started to laugh too. They gathered the silver to them, mounding it around, piling it high. They picked through shattered china, broken goblets, and the half-moons of delicate-stemmed glassware, unearthing more and more wealth. Pima went to find something to hold it all. She returned with hemp sacking that they would have called scavenge just a few minutes ago, could have sold off for a couple copper lengths, and would have called it a good day. And now it was just something to hold the real treasure. All that silver. Serving trays and forks and knives went into the sacks. Forks so small that they disappeared in Naylor's hand. Spoons so big and deep they could have been used as ladles at Chen's grub shack where he served 100 head at a time. Naylor straightened. I'm gonna see what else there is. There might be more like this. Pima grunted acknowledgement. Naylor clambered back into the main passage and made his way past a sitting room full of fallen paintings and shattered statuary. Even with a full light crew, it would take them several days to strip the clipper of all the brass and copper and wiring. Once he and Pima took the first scavenge off, they'd have to come up with a plan. There had to be some way to get a share of the rest. Lucky and smart. They needed to be lucky and smart. The problem was, this lucky strike was almost too big to be smart about. He found another cabin door and kicked it open. An odd room, full of dolls and waterlogged stuffed bears, gleaming wooden trains built like little maglevs. A torn painting hung on one wall. A clipper ship, maybe even this one, painted from high up, looking down on the deck. All the faces below were looking up, staring into the heights. The artist was pretty good. The painting almost like a photograph. Looking into it gave Naylor a spooky feeling, as if he were about to fall into the painting and onto the deck of that ship. Land on all those people with their swank clothes and cool eyes staring up at him. It was dizzying. He turned away from the image and scanned the cabin again. On the far side of the room there was another door. He crawled along the wall that was now a floor and hefted the door open. A bedroom. Coverlets everywhere and a huge shattered bed. And a beautiful girl, dead in a mangle, staring at him with wide black eyes. Naylor sucked in his breath. Even bruised and dead, she was pretty, pinned under the pile of her bed and the weight of all the stuff that had crushed her. Her black hair strung across her face like a wet net. Wide, dark eyes stared. Her blouse was torn and soaked, the fabric a complex weave of color and silvery threads. She was young, not like the captain and the half-men, maybe Pima's age. A rich girl with a diamond-pierced nose. He would have envied her if she wasn't so dead. He called out to Pima. Found another deader! Another half-man! Pima called back. Naylor didn't answer. Didn't take his eyes off the dead girl. Scrambling sounds came from behind, and then Pima appeared. Damn, she said. Too bad. Pretty, huh? Pima laughed. Didn't know you liked corpses. Naylor made a face of disgust. If I want a girl, there's plenty of live ones. Thanks. Pima grinned. Yeah, but this one won't slap you like Moon Girl did when you tried to kiss her. Lips look a little cold, though. Kiss that one and she'd take you down to the scavenge god's scales for sure. Ugh, Naylor made a face. Pima spent too much time around heavy crews. It gave her a hard-edged sense of humor. She's got gold on her, Pima said. Naylor had been looking at the girl's black eyes, but Pima was right. Gold around her slender brown throat, gold on her fingers. If it was real, it was a fortune, worth more than anything they'd found so far. As one, he and Pima crawled across the wreckage to the broken body. The girl's corpse was buried under furniture. None of it had even been secured. as if the rich swanks thought a storm wouldn't dare rearrange their furniture, as if they were gods and didn't just predict the weather with their instruments and satellites, but also told it what to do. Naylor shivered at the sight of the broken rich girl. There were lessons there, as powerful as the ones Pima's mother taught when she explained how they were to survive into adulthood. Pride and death came just as fast, whether you were Bappy thinking you were the boss of the light crew forever, or whether you were this shattered girl with her fine toys and fine clothes, and pretty gold and jewels. They crouched beside the body. "At least there's no crabs," Pima muttered. She took the girl's necklace and yanked. The girl's head jerked back like a marionette's, and the chain parted. The golden pendant swung before them, mesmerizing wealth in Pima's fist. One quick grab, and they were richer than anyone except maybe Lucky Strike. They both started working on the dead girl's rings, tugging them from the cool flesh, trying to get them off. "Damn," Naylor muttered, tugging harder. "Her fingers got all stiff." "Yours stuck too?" Pima asked. "They're all fat and waterlogged. None of the rings come off." Pima drew her work knife. "Here." Naylor made a face of disgust. "You just going to chop her fingers off?" "No worse than cutting the head off a chicken. And at least she's not gonna squawk and flap around." Pima set the knife against the girl's finger. "Do it with me." "Where do I cut?" "On the joint," Pima indicated. "You can't cut through the bone. This way they pop right off." Naylor shrugged and got out his own knife. He set it against the joint where it would part easily. He pressed his blade into the girl's flesh. Blood welled up as he cut. The girl's black eyes blinked. Chapter 9. "Blood and rust!" Naylor leaped back. "She's not a deader! She's alive!" "What?" Pima scrambled away from the girl. "Her eyes moved! I saw them!" Naylor's heart hammered in his chest. He fought the urge to bolt from the cabin. The girl lay still now, but his skin was crawling. "I cut her, and she moved." "I didn't see." Pima stopped mid-sentence. The drowned girl's dark eyes focused on her. They went from Pima to Naylor and back to Pima. "Fates," Naylor whispered. Cold fingers ran up his spine, raising hackles. It was like their knives had summoned her ghost back into her body. The dead girl's lips started to move. No words came out, just a barely audible hiss. "That's some creepy shit," Pima murmured. The girl continued whispering, a steady stream of sibilance, a chant, a plea, all so low they could barely make out the words. Against his better judgment, Naylor crept forward, drawn by her eyes and desperation. The girl's gold-decorated fingers twitched, reached for him. Pima came up behind. The girl strained toward them, but they both stayed out of her grasp. More whispered words, prayer sounds, begging, an exhalation of storm and salt terror. Her eyes searched the cabin, widened in fear, terrified by something only she could see. Her gaze locked on Naylor again, desperate, pleading. Still she whispered. He leaned closer, straining to understand her words. The girl's hands fluttered weakly against his arms, reached up to touch his face, a movement light as butterflies as she tried to pull him close. He leaned in, letting the drowned girl's fingers clutch at him. Her whispering lips brushed his ear. She was praying. Soft, begging words to Ganesha and the Buddha, to Kali Mary Mercy and the Christian God. She was praying to anything at all, begging the fates to let her walk from the shadow of death. Pleas spilled from her lips, a desperate trickle. She was broken, soon to die, but still the words slipped out in a steady whisper. Tam karuna ke sa akar, tam palankarta, Hail Mary, full of grace. Ashan Chan Parastatva, release me from suffering. He drew away. Her fingers slipped from his cheek like orchid petals falling. She's dying, Pima said. The girl's eyes had become unfocused. Her lips still moved, but she seemed to be losing energy now, losing her will to pray. The words were a quiet punctuation to the larger sounds of the ocean and coast outside. Gulls calling, the surf, the creak and shift of the wrecked ship. Gradually the words stopped. Her body stilled. Pima and Naylor exchanged glances. The gold on the girl's fingers glittered. Pima lifted her knife. Fates, that's creepy. Let's get the gold and get the hell out of here. You gonna cut her fingers off while she's still breathing? She's not breathing for long. Pima pointed at the bed and sea chests and debris piled on top of her. She's a goner. If I slit her throat, I'm doing her a favor. She crept close and prodded the girl's hand. The drowned girl didn't respond. She's dead now anyway. Pima pressed the knife to the girl's finger again. The girl's eyes snapped open. Please, she whispered. Pima pressed her lips together, ignoring the words. The girl's free hand brushed at Pima's face and Pima swatted it away. Pima leaned on the knife and blood welled up. The girl didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just watched, black eyes begging as the knife cut into her brown skin. Please, she said again. Naylor's skin crawled. Don't do it, Pima. Pima glanced up at him. You going to get squeamish on me? You think you're going to save her? Be her white knight, like in Mom's kitty stories. You're just a beach rat, and she's a swank. She gets out of here, this ship's hers, and we lose everything. We don't know that. Don't be stupid. This is only scavenge if she's not standing on it, saying it's hers. All that silver we found, all this gold on her fingers. You know this boat's hers. You know it. Look at the room she's in. Pima waved a hand at the wreckage around them. She's no servant, that's for sure. She's a damn swank. We let her out. We lose everything. She looked at the girl. Sorry, Swank. You're worth more dead than alive. She glanced at Naylor. If it makes you feel better, I'll put her down first. She moved the knife to the girl's smooth brown throat. The girl's eyes went to him, starving for salvation, but she didn't speak again, only stared. Don't cut her, Naylor said. We can't make a lucky strike like this. It would be like Sloth was with me. It's not the same at all. Sloth was crew. She swore blood oath with you. She didn't have morals. But this swank... Pima tapped the drowned girl with her knife. She's not crew. She's just a boss girl with a lot of gold. She made a face. If we pig stick her, we're rich. No more crew for life, right? The gold glittered on the girl's fingers. Naylor struggled with his conflicting emotions. It was more wealth than he had ever seen. More wealth than most of the crews collected in years off the ships, and yet it decorated this girl's fingers as casually as Moon Girl pierced her lip with steel. Pima pressed her case. This is once in a lifetime, Naylor. We play it smart, or we're screwed for life. She was shaking, and a glitter of tears showed in her eyes. I don't like it either, She looked down at the girl. It's not personal. It's just her, or us. Maybe she'll give us a reward for saving her, he said. We both know that's not the way it works. Pima looked at him sadly. That's for fairy tales and Pearlie's mom's stories about the Raja who falls in love with his servant girl. We either get rich or we die on heavy crew, if we're lucky. Maybe we walk oil scavenge until our legs get sores and your dad beats your head in. What else? The harvesters? The nail sheds. We can always run Red Rippers and Crystal Slide out to the wrecks until Lawson and Carlson string us up. That's what we get. And Swanky here, she goes right back to her rich girl life. Pima paused. Or we get out. With this gold, we get out for good. Naylor stared at the girl. A few days ago, he would have cut her. He would have apologized to those desperate eyes and put the knife in her neck. He would have made it a fast kill so she wouldn't suffer. He wouldn't hurt her the way his dad liked to hurt people, but still he would have cut her dead, and then he would have stripped that gold off her waterlogged corpse and walked away. He would have felt sorry, sure. Would even have put an offering on the scavenge god's scale to help her get on to whatever afterlife she believed in. But she would have been dead, and he would have called himself lucky. Now, though, the dark reek of the oil room filled his mind. The memory of being up to his neck in warm death, staring up at Sloth high above him, her LED paint mark glowing. Salvation, if only he could convince her. If only he could reach out and touch that part of her that cared for something other than herself, knowing that there was a lever inside her somewhere, and if only he could pull it, she would go for help, and he would be saved, and everything would be fine. He'd been so desperate to get Sloth to care, but he hadn't been able to find the lever. Or maybe the lever hadn't been there after all. Some people couldn't see any farther than themselves. People like Sloth. People like his dad. Richard Lopez wouldn't hesitate. He'd slash the rich girl's throat and take the rings and shake the blood off them and laugh. A week ago, Naylor knew for a fact that he could have done the same. This swank girl wasn't Crew. He didn't owe her anything. But now, after his time in the oil room, all he could think of was how much he'd wanted Sloth to believe that his life was just as important as hers. The gold on the drowned girl's fingers glittered. What was wrong with him? Naylor wanted to punch a wall. Why couldn't he just be smart? Why couldn't he just crew up and cut the girl and take the scavenge? Naylor could almost hear his father laughing at him, mocking him for his stupidity. But as Naylor stared into the drowned girl's pleading eyes, they might as well have been his own. I'm sorry, Pima, he said. I can't do it. We gotta help her. Pima slumped. You sure? Yeah. Hell. Pima wiped her eyes. I should pig stick her anyway. You'd thank me later. Don't, please. We both know it's not right. Right? What's right? Look at all that gold. Don't cut her throat. Pima grimaced, but she withdrew her knife. Maybe she'll let us keep the silverware. Yeah, maybe. Already he was regretting the choice, watching his hopes for a different future fall away. Tomorrow he and Pima would be shipbreaking again, and this girl would either live and walk away, or she'd alert the rest of the Bright Sands shipbreakers to the scavenge, and either way, he was out of luck. He'd been lucky, and now he was throwing it away. I'm sorry, he said again. and he wasn't sure if it was Pima he was sorry for, or himself, or the girl who blinked at him with wide black eyes, and who, if he was very lucky indeed, might not make it through the night. "I'm sorry." "Tide's coming in," Pima said. "If you're going to be a hero rescuer, you'd better do it quick." The girl was stuck under all sorts of junk, a wealth of sea chests and the big four-poster bed. It took them almost an hour to pull all the stuff free. The girl didn't say anything more as they worked. Once she gasped as they shifted a chest off her, and Naylor worried that they'd perhaps crushed her in the shifting wreckage. But when they finally pulled her body free, soaked and shivering in the failing light, she seemed whole. Her skin was bloody and her clothes were torn and sopping, but she was alive. Pima inspected her body. "Damn, Naylor, she's almost as lucky as you." And then she made a face of disgust when she realized that with Naylor's bad arm, Pima was going to be the rescuer after all. "She's not going to kiss you for a thank you if you don't crew up," she smirked. "Shut up," Naylor muttered. But he was suddenly aware of the girl's slim form under her wet clothes, the curve of her body, the flash of thigh and throat that showed in the torn fabric of her skirt and blouse. Pima just laughed. She levered the drowned girl out of the cabin and down through the canted corridors of the ship until they spilled out the hole in the hull. The girl was heavy, barely able to walk or help in any way. She might as well have been a corpse, Pima commented as she grunted and dragged the girl out. It took both of them to lower her over the side and into the lapping waters of the tide, Naylor awkwardly holding her and lowering her down into Pima's upstretched arms, and then both of them staggering and stumbling in the increasing surf. "Get the damn silver," Pima grunted. "At least get that sack off. If anyone else finds the ship, we want that hidden." Naylor clambered back through the ship, collecting. When he stood again at the edge of the hull's cracked hollow, Pima was standing alone in the water, foam up to her thighs. For a moment, he thought she'd drowned the girl, but then he saw a flash of pale clothing on the rocks at the base of the island. Pima grinned. "You thought I pig-stuck her, didn't you?" "No." Pima just laughed. Waves sloshed around her, splashing up her dark legs, soaking her shorts. The ship creaked in the roll of the waves. "Tide's coming," Pima said. "Let's get going." Naylor looked across the bay to where the shipbreaking yard shone in the fading sun. "We're never going to get her back over the sand in time." "You want me to run for a boat?" Pima asked. "No, I'm beat. Let's hold here on the island and cross in the morning. Maybe we can think of some way to deal with the rest of the scavenge by then." Pima glanced back at the girl where she lay balled up and shivering. "Yeah, okay. She won't care one way or the other." She pointed back into the ship. "But if we're staying, let's find what we can in there. There's food, plenty of other stuff. We'll camp on the island and bring her over tomorrow." Naylor gave her a mock salute. "Good idea." He headed back to the pantry, hunting. He found muffins waterlogged with salt, bruised mangoes and bananas and pomegranates all scattered through the galley, salt beef that was still good and seemed to have barely been touched, a cured ham. There was so much meat he couldn't believe it. Against his will, he was already salivating. He dragged everything back to where the hull was cracked. He climbed down carefully, cradling everything in a net bag he found in the galley. The water was getting deeper, all right. It tugged and drew at him as he slogged out of the surf, keeping the food high. After ferrying everything from the ship, he noticed their rescued girl shivering and went back to the ship again. It was almost dark inside now. He found blankets of rich wool, damp but still warm, and dragged them out with the rest of the scavenge. He crossed with waves at his waist, yanked about by frothing surf. Holding the blankets over his head, he stumbled up on shore and dumped his load of blankets. He glanced at where the girl was shivering. You still didn't kill her, huh? I told you I wouldn't. Pima jerked her head toward the shivering girl. You got stuff for a fire? Naylor shrugged. Nah. Come on, Naylor. Pima made a face of exasperation. She'll need a fire if you want her to live. She headed back into the wreck, slogging through the rush of the darkening waves. See if there's fresh water in there, too, Naylor called after her. He picked up the load of blankets and started hauling them to higher ground, hunting for something on the hillside that had a semblance of being flat. Eventually, he found an area beside the roots of a cypress tree that wasn't so bad. He started clearing space amongst the rocks and kudzu vines. By the time he clambered back down to the shore, Pima had returned with a load of the clipper's cracked furniture. She had also found a store of kerosene and a sparker in the mix of trash in the galley. After a few more times shuttling loads of food and fuel up to their camp, they finally hauled up the drowned girl. Naylor's right shoulder and upper back burned with all the activity, and he was glad he hadn't been forced onto light crew today. It was bad enough just doing this little bit of work. Soon they got the furniture burning merrily, and Naylor cut slices of ham for them to gnaw on. Good eating, huh? He said, when Pima held out her hand for more. Yeah, swanks live pretty damn good. We're pretty swank ourselves, Naylor pointed out. He waved at the scavenged wealth around them. We're eating better than Lucky Strike tonight. As soon as he said it, he thought it could be true. The fire flickered before him, casting light on Pima and the drowned girl, illuminating the bags of food, the sack of silver and tableware, the thick wool blankets of the north, the gold glittering on the drowned girl's fingers, shining like stars in the crackle of the campfire. It was more than anyone in the shipbreaking yards had, and all of it was just wreckage for the drowned girl. Her wealth was huge. A ship full of food and luxury, her neck and fingers and wrists draped in gold and jewels, and a face more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. Not even Bappy's magazine girls had been so pretty. She's damn rich, he muttered. Look at everything she's got. It's more than even the magazines have. In fact, he was realizing that the magazine pictures were pretending to reach this level of wealth, and yet somehow had no idea how to attain it. You think she's got a house of her own? He asked. Pima made a face. Of course she has a house. All rich people have houses. You think it's as big as her ship? Pima hesitated, working over the thought. I guess it could be. Naylor chewed his lip, considering their own rough shelters on the beach, squats made of branches and scavenged planks and palm leaves that blew away like trash whenever storms came. The fire warmed and dried them, and they were silent for a long time, watching as the furniture of the ship crackled and burned. Check it out, Pima said suddenly. The girl's eyes, closed for a long time, were now open, watching the fire. Pima and Naylor studied the girl. The girl studied them in turn. You're awake, huh? Naylor said. The girl didn't respond. Her eyes watched them, silent as a child. Her lips didn't move. She didn't pray. She didn't say anything. She blinked, staring at him, but still she said nothing. Pima knelt down beside her. You want some water? You thirsty? The girl's eyes went to her, but she remained silent. You think she's gone crazy? Naylor asked. Pima shook her head. Hell if I know. She took a small silver cup and poured water into it. She held it before the girl, watching. You thirsty, huh? You want some water? The girl made a weak motion and strained toward the cup. Pima brought the water to her lips, and she sipped awkwardly. The girl's eyes were more focused, watching both of them. Pima tried to give her more water, but she turned her face away and made to sit up instead. When she had pushed herself completely upright, she drew her limbs inward, curling her arms around her legs. The firelight flickered orange and bright on her face. Pima offered the water again, and this time the girl drank fully, finishing it and eyeing the jug wistfully. "Give her more," Naylor said, and again the girl drank, this time taking the cup in her own shaking hand. Water spilled down her chin as she drank greedily. "Hey!" Pima grabbed the cup back. "Watch it! That's all the water we've got tonight." She gave the girl a look of annoyance, then turned and rifled through the sack of fruit that Naylor had gathered. She came up with an orange that she sliced into wedges and offered to the girl. The girl took a wedge and ate greedily, then accepted another. She was almost feral in her fascination as she watched Pima slice chunks from the orange. But after another few bites, she lay down again, seeming to fold onto the ground with exhaustion. She smiled weakly and murmured, "Thank you." And then her eyes closed and she went silent. Pima pursed her lips. She got up and pulled the blanket more fully over the girl's still form. "Guess you got a live one, Naylor." "Guess so." Naylor didn't know if he was relieved or saddened by the girl's survival. She lay peaceful now, eyes closed, breathing deeply, asleep it seemed. If she had died, or been crazy, it would have been so much easier. "I sure hope you know what you're doing," Pima muttered. Chapter 10. If he was honest with himself, Naylor could admit he had no idea what he was doing. He was making it up as he went along, some new version of a future, and all he really knew was that this strange, swank girl needed to be part of it. This rich girl with her diamond nose jewel and her gold rings and fingers all intact, with her dark glittering eyes alive instead of dead. He sat on the far side of their furniture fire, arms wrapped around his knees as he watched Pima give her the rest of the orange. Two girls, two different lives. Pima, dark, strong, and scared, tattooed with light crew information and lucky symbols. Crop-haired, hard-muscled, and sharply alive. This other one, a far lighter brown, untouched by sun, with long black flowing hair and movements all smooth and soft, polished and precise. Her face and bare arms unmarred by abuse or stray wiring or chemical burns. Two girls, two different lives, two different bits of luck. Naylor tugged at his wide-bored earrings. He and Pima both had their share of marks, everything from tattoos that let them work the cruise, to their own carefully worked ink skin scars, showing blessings of the rust saint and the fates. But this girl wasn't marked at all. No decorative tattoos, no work marks, no light gang tats. Nothing. A blank. He was a little shorter than her, but he knew he could kill her if he had to. He couldn't beat Pima in a fight, but this one, she was soft. "Why didn't you kill me?" Naylor startled. The girl's eyes were open again, watching him across the fire, reflecting the blaze of shattered ship furniture and picture frames. "Why didn't you kill me when you had a chance?" she whispered. Her words were cultured, exquisite in her mouth, clipped and close and precise, as if she were one of the boss men who came down to watch the work and paid out cash bonus for good salvage. Perfectly formed words, with not a break in them, not a hard edge. She accepted the last of the orange slices from Pima and ate them, taking her time and seeming to savor them. Slowly, she pushed herself upright again. Her eyes went from Naylor to Pima. "You could have just let me die." She wiped the corner of her mouth with the palm of her hand, licking at the last of the orange's juice. I couldn't get out. You could have been rich with my gold. Why? Ask Lucky Boy, Pima said, disgusted. It wasn't my idea. The girl looked at him. You're called Lucky Boy? Naylor couldn't tell if it was an honest question or if she was making fun of him. He stifled his unease. Found your wreck, didn't I? Her lips quirked. I guess that makes me a lucky girl then, doesn't it? Her eyes twinkled. Pima laughed. She squatted beside her. Yeah, sure, lucky girl. Damn lucky. For a moment her eyes lingered hungrily on Lucky Girl's hands, on the gold glittering against her brown skin. Damn lucky. So why not take my gold and walk away? She held up her hand where the thin slivers of their blades had cut. You could have had my fingers for fate amulets, right? Could have had my gold and my finger bones too. Her smooth features had hardened. She was clever, Naylor realized. Soft, but not stupid. Naylor couldn't help thinking that he'd made a mistake letting her live. It was hard to tell when you were being smart and when you were being too smart for your own good. And this girl, she already seemed to be taking over the space around the fire. Owning it, asking the questions instead of answering them. Lucky Strike always said there was a fine line between clever and stupid, and laughed his head off every time he said it. Watching this girl across the fire taunt and tease him, Naylor suddenly had the feeling that he understood. I think one of my fingers would have made a nice amulet for you, she said to him. Would have made you exquisitely lucky. Pima laughed again. Naylor scowled. Dozens of futures extended ahead of him, depending on his luck and the will of the fates, and the variable that this girl presented. He could see those roads spinning away from him in different directions. He was standing at their hub, looking down each of them in turn, but he could see only so far, 1 or 2 steps ahead at best. And now, as he stared at the sharp eyes of this perfectly unblemished swank, he realized that he had missed a factor. He didn't know anything about the girl. He knew about gold, though. Gold bought security, salvation from the ships and the braking and light crew. Lucky Strike had gone down that road. Naylor would have been smarter to simply let Pima pig-stick the girl and be done with it. But what if there were other roads? What if there was a reward for this rich girl? What if she could be useful in some other way? You got crew who will come looking for you? He asked. Crew? Someone want you to come home?